you'll be able to see the screen. One of the things I was hoping you'd be able to do is demonstrate the full features of the system. So I'll do that today. The speed of the internet here is not bad. It's not great, but it's typically depends on how fast we have at your particular location when you actually start to do some of the administrative features associated with managing an election as an election official. My name is Dean Smith. I'm the president of IntelliVote Systems. We're a Nova Scotia-based company, and I had the opportunity to chat with a bunch of you folks this morning. Some of you are getting the long version. We get the Coles Notes version this morning, but the presentation this afternoon, my hope is to be able to have you understand the various different rationale for why people go to all electronic voting, why some people say, well, I think I'll just go electronic in advance poll. Some people say I'll use electronic up to and including election day in concert with paper voting. So a lot of municipalities that are first trying out electronic voting will look at the options, and in the case of, say, Truro and Yarmouth, I know they've both decided they're going to go all electronic. Their push is for all electronic and to do away with paper ballots. And I think Windsor's moving that way, and I think Berwick may be holding on to their paper ballots for election day, but not advance polling. And Halifax, of course, is going all electronic for 8 days, and then stopping the electronic voting and then going paper for election day. All the advance voting is going to be just electronic. They're not going to open up paper voting at all. So mixing and matching is the norm. Like, figure out what works best. Incorporating electronic voting in with your paper-based voting tends to be the startup for most organizations, for most municipalities. Others in Ontario go, and they tend to do this in Ontario only because they're moving from paper-based voting that included mail-in ballots. They haven't had polling stations for 3 or 4 elections. They just mail them out, somebody mails them back, they count them, and that's their election process. So switching in Ontario from mailing something out and just having the people vote and just count the votes electronically is not as big a deal as it may be in Nova Scotia, where we've never really had a lot of mail-in balloting anywhere. So what I want to do today is cover off a bunch of different things, and this looks familiar to some of you folks this morning with a lot more topics entered. What I want to be able to do today is cover off most of the issues associated with understanding how you can implement electronic voting, the legislative and the bylaw issues associated with it, and at the same time be able to understand what the issues typically are from maybe council, if you're presenting to council, or you're part of council, or you're speaking at council and you're trying to ensure that residents who may be attending council sessions who are interested in it get a full appreciation for it. The other thing is, typically if you're on council and you're going to be running again, you will get lots of questions as you go campaigning, or you see people in the street or knock on doors. So we do have a range of services that we provide that include talking to potential candidates, having them understand. There is included in this presentation today information for election officials, so returning officers, for CAOs, for anybody that has to work or deal with the bylaws that are going to be created. And in addition to that, for candidates, there's a candidate module in this. And this is important to understand. If you have advanced polling, by definition, advanced polling usually allows the potential candidates, or the candidates who are signed up, to be able to see the list of eligible electors who have participated in the advanced polling. So by law in Nova Scotia, and actually in almost every province in Canada, you have to do that. So if you have an advanced poll, candidate comes in later on and says, I'd like to see all the people who have voted at the advanced poll. They either come in some cases they email it to people, in other cases they just have it sit at the clerk's office, and the candidates come in and peruse that. In the electronic world, if they need to do that, then the mechanism that we have is an electronic capability for all candidates to be able to see that during the election. So from the start of the election period right up to and including election day, they can see the electronic version of the struck-off list. So as you, or as all the other voters participate in the election, and they cast their ballot electronically, it actually shows up as a check mark next to the name, exactly as it is. So it's a struck-off list, an electronic struck-off list, that's made available to the candidates. That is singularly the most popular thing on the system, as you can well imagine, especially for candidates who are, over the course of the week, they actually manage the list and manage their campaigning, because they can still campaign in the week prior to the election. So what they see is this elector list. They can set up their own version of it. They can look at it by ward, they look at it by street. So if they have a BlackBerry, they're walking down the street and they go on Main Street, gee, it'd be interesting to see who on Main Street has or has not voted yet, and then you can selectively knock on doors. It's a very popular tool, it's used, it's one of those things that keeps all the scrutineers out of the way of the election officials. They just don't show up at the polling stations. There's no scrutineers. In the 2008 elections we did here in Nova Scotia, we had folks from Elections Canada, Elections New Brunswick, Elections Nova Scotia, from Winnipeg, from Bermuda. They were all behind the scenes in our offices watching the election happen because they wanted to see what happens behind the scenes. And one of the things that we thought we'd do is we'd take them down to Windsor on election day and show them what happens in a polling location with electronic voting. And they went in, and it was actually boring. There was 2 people there, sitting there, and for the first 20 minutes, there was actually no voters there. It was the middle of the day, and there was a scrutineer table, and they never saw a scrutineer. The idea here is that to understand that the candidates find a tool that's valuable for them in campaigning, and it's an important part of the delivery of the system to make sure that information stays secure, and it's covered under the same document that they sign when they sign and say that how they'll use the elector information they're provided. So we'll get into showing you that as well as we go through this, because it's an important part of the considerations. This is what we want to talk about today, so I'll get right into it. I showed this morning as well to the folks. There is more electronic voting done in Canada than any place else in the world. We do more of it. Our company does most of that, so well over 90% of all the elections done in Canada are done by IntelliVote. And as I mentioned this morning as well, you probably would have got some communications perhaps from a new player in the market, a company called Seidel, who has been in business for quite a few years as well. They play in other parts of the world. They're coming to Canada now, obviously, because it's a very fertile area for electronic voting. Most of the other places that they're in, the United States and Europe, for example, they're a little behind the times, relatively speaking. The idea that you can mail out a letter in a pin and have somebody actually vote in a binding election, in most places in the world, it's not that easy. There's additional segments of the population that cannot vote that way, and by law in the States, for example, you have to go to a polling station. They've just now put legislation in place in the States and something called, under the Obama administration, something called the MOVE Act, and that allows Military Overseas Voters Enhancement Program is what it's called. And basically what it does is it allows, in the United States for the first time, electronic ballots to be transmitted from somebody who is not in a polling station. And that means the military personnel primarily, or embassy personnel that are out of the country. Less than 20% of all the mail-back ballots from the United States, people overseas, get counted. It's a terrible system. Everybody recognizes it's a terrible system, and all the ballots typically come in too late after the event has closed or the voting has ceased. So we also are really the subject matter experts in terms of the legislative part of your requirements. So internet voting requires a specific bylaw to be passed, as most of you understand. So the bylaw, if you look in your kits, we have samples in there of the bylaws that have been used successfully here. One of them is the HRM version, which is a little more verbose than everybody else's. It runs 7 or 8 pages. The one-page version of it that's also complemented with our policies and procedures document is the basis under which most bylaws are created and used. So we consult, and I consult all over the world really on electronic voting as a concept and how you put in place the legislation to do it in. So Bermuda and Norway and Romania and Bulgaria and some places like that I've gone, and I've worked with the legislators there to put in place. Because the concept of marking a ballot by pushing a button on a phone, you have to be able to interpret the intent of the voter and how you record that. So you have to be able to put that into terms that pass legal muster in each of the particular countries that you happen to be working in. So the key point here is that we are a world leader in it. We're number 1 or number 2 in the world, depending on what metric you use. In terms of total number of elections, binding elections, we've done more than anybody in the world. In terms of the sheer numbers of people, the last major set of elections we did for municipal governments was in 2010, where we did 34 municipal elections in Ontario at the same time. and there was close to 500,000 people eligible to vote in those elections. And when you do an electronic election, you have to assume that everyone's going to vote. Unlike the paper world where you might be able to get away with saying, well, the really good turnout would be 60%, maybe we'll only create that many paper ballots. In some cases, they always do a 1-for-1. In some places, they play the odds to try to save money. Electronic voting, you have to assume everybody's going to come out and vote. So once again, we give voters a choice. We used to have a marketing collateral piece that we had a series of arms kind of cut off here, and one was holding a pencil, one was holding a mouse, one was holding a telephone, one was holding their hand up, and it said a vote for what's next, talking about electronic voting. And everyone we showed it to said, yeah, sometime in the future we'll look at that. So the marketing didn't work exactly as we'd hoped. It was a neat concept. But what we do now is we talk about choice. And as electors and as politicians and as administrators, giving choice to your voters is an important part of it. So if you look at our marketing material on the front of everything you see there, that's really about any place, any time, anywhere, any location. Doesn't matter what you're doing or where you are, 7/24 up to throughout the voting period, you can cast your ballot, and that's important. Whether you're dealing with infirmed or disabled voters, or whether you're dealing with military personnel or snowbirds or anything like that, or you're dealing with shift workers or people who normally would, work and then go home and have to look after the family or things like that. The combination and permutation of people who can't get out and vote on election day is pretty significant. I showed this also this morning, but what we do is a little different than what other suppliers do as well. We do presentations like this, obviously, but we know the minutiae of what happens in elections. All the forms that the electors, that the election people have to actually fill out and create, those are all built into our system. So the 10A form, which is the form that's required for eligibility for voting for enumerated people, you have to fill it out in triplicate. So if somebody comes and say, I want to be put on the electors list, all that information has to be filled out on existing forms. We've already built those into our application. So when you fill out the information, you click on a button, basically what it does, it fills out an already filled out 10A form. You sign it, the voter signs it, or the elector signs it, and you make your copies, and then they need a letter, the same as everybody else got in the mail. So they know they're not on the electors list because their spouse or everybody else in the neighborhood got this letter in the mail, and they come in and say, I want the letter too. And there's just another button next to it that, once they're enumerated, you click the other button, it prints out the voter letter, customized with their name on it, with the district they're voting in, and all the information. So that's all unique to what we've put together, because we understand the electoral process virtually, and it differs in every province, but our capability to customize it is fairly straightforward. We talked already about the bylaws. The bylaws that you'll need to put in place, those are fairly straightforward. Recent legislation changes mean that you can now have a completely electronic election in Nova Scotia. You could not last time. In 2008, you had to have, if you offered voting, you had to offer paper voting as well. Now if you offer internet voting, you have to offer at least another option, and that other option is telephone voting. So we combine the two of them. So if you offer a complete electronic vote, and you just want to do that, then the legislation allows you to do that now.
So if the power goes off, you're okay as well?
Yeah, because I mean, the system is located in the data center in Bell Alliance Data Center, so they have diesel and everything. So as long as you can use your cell phone, and most people can when the power goes out, it's usually a week worth of voting. If the power's out for a week, and it has been out for a week in some places before, you can still conduct it. And bear in mind, anytime an election has circumstances that mean you have to increase or add days to it, it's within the scope already of legislation in Nova Scotia under the emergency portion of the legislation that says you as the electoral authority can say, I want to add 2 more days because I feel voters were disenfranchised from voting. So, and it happened in Ontario. We were dealing with Ontario. There was a car accident on a bridge going to the polling station, and they basically had the police were there and they closed off the bridge. And the school was across the bridge, and it's just outside a place called Edwardsburg Cardinal where we were doing an election. And they basically had their paper poll there as well, and they just added 2 hours to it. While they cleaned up the thing, they said it was supposed to close then, and they added 2 hours in it. So we know it's been used. We know in Nova Scotia there are circumstances. So if you lose power, if you have power at your home, or if you have If you have Eastlink, you're probably out of luck. If you have Lion and you're using regular line services, your phone will probably still work in a power failure because the power is delivered through the cabling there. We talked a little earlier this morning, but one thing I wanted to go over again is this concept of how clean your elector list is. It's very important because you're going to be sending out letters to everybody. You want to make sure that the elector list is clean. And what you have, we work with a company out of Toronto called DataFix. And DataFix has the capability to take your elector list and run it against the National Change of Address database from Canada Post. So over the last 3 years, anybody who's changed their mailing address, usually their residence as a result of that, their location or where they're living, and they want to get their mail forwarded, they have to register on the National Change of Address. So what happens is DataFix will take your elector list that Elections Nova Scotia gives you, and then they'll run it against that list. And I was using the example this morning. There was almost 12,000 erroneous people on the list in Halifax HRM in 2008 when we worked with them. So they thought it was pretty clean. Elections Nova Scotia thought it was fairly up to date. But the information that Elections Nova Scotia gets is not current. It's never current. It's a lot of information that comes based on motor vehicles changes and things like that. A lot of people, as they move around Nova Scotia, in the MSI side of it, you usually don't update that until you go back to the doctor. So there's no impetus, no requirement to change a lot of your residents' information short of getting your mailing address changed. So what they do is they compare your data to that, and at that point in time, DataFix will actually say, okay, here's a bunch of people who actually don't live in your location anymore, and you should take them off your list. Additionally, they find duplicates, and this is a big problem. In Halifax, once again, there was almost 8,000 duplicates on the list. DataFix has fuzzy logic in their application that says, well, you've got a Robert Smith at this location, born at this date, and you've got a Bob Smith that's sitting at the same location with the same birthday. So even though the names aren't the same, they might have registered twice with a Robert and a Bob, and those are actually the same person. So they don't take them off the list, they flag them and say there's a 95% probability that Robert and Bob are the same one. Well, in actual fact, if you didn't compare the date of birth, they might have been father's son or something like that. So what they do is all the information that's provided by Elections Nova Scotia gets used in the comparison, and it's a really good mechanism to be able to cleanse your data. So they don't take it off, they highlight it, and they say, as you go through, you tell us which of these two, which look the same to us, that you want to keep. And you click on it, and it takes the other one and it sets it aside in a deleted file, so you don't ever delete them, but you don't include them on the mail that happens after that fact. In the implementation plan, when it actually comes time to run the election and work with you folks on the election, there's a series of tools and capability. We have about a 100-point checklist. So when the candidate declaration time comes, there's all kinds of activity happen as a result of that. So once the candidates are declared, it's recording of the candidate's name for the telephone part of it, the actual spelling of the name. In Nova Scotia, the order in which the candidates appear on the ballot is defined in legislation. In some other events we do, and in some other locations, in British Columbia, for example, it's really the order in which the candidates apply or candidates confirm that they're going to run in the election. So if you want to be at the top of the list, you apply early and your name gets on the top of the list. So it varies by organization and groupings like that. So those are some of the things that we look at when we deal with the critical path. All the guides and all the training associated with it is included in the price of our service. So we don't charge extra for putting on presentations, for training, for the guides that you need for the election officials, for the help desk folks, for the auditors and things like that. Those are all included as part of our service. And we charge $1, it's in the bottom of the list or on the last slide here, but we charge $1.75 per eligible elector on your list. And there's another charge of $1 if you use us to get the mailed to the elector. So the stamp alone on that is 61 cents plus tax, so 65 cents, and then all the processing, all the management of the mail out your list and everything like that. We've never had an instance where we've not been used for that. Our system's already linked to big printers that already do that, and it makes it very easy, it's just hands-off. If you had a couple of nursing homes in your area that you wanted to have all their mail delivered to you as the electoral authorities, and you wanted to walk in and do a manual ballot or a manual polling station there, that part's included in it. We can do that, just give us the addresses. So in both Windsor and Berwick, they did that last time, where they bundled stuff. And because the whole issue when you do a mobile poll, a question of whether or not the voter actually has the competency to vote. That's not your decision as an electoral authority. It's typically the administrator or somebody who knows them whether they have the competency to vote. So lots of times just sending the mail to it, you don't know where the mail's going, whether they get their mail. So a lot of them, in the case of, say, Windsor and Berwick, they asked to have the mail sent to them, and they walked over and actually conducted the elections there. They actually took a PC over in one of them, and the other one, the administrator had a PC, and they used her PC to allow the people to come down and vote where they wanted that way. So the election period support, we're around, obviously we're Nova Scotia based, so we're around during that, that particular event. So what I'm going to do is I want to quickly just do give you an idea of what a voting session would typically look like. If you want to open your kits and just take a look at the two different types of voter letters that come out, there's a subtle difference between them. So it's the fictitious town of New Scotland, and you'll see that one of them says, how can I vote? One of them says option 1 and option 2 on it. The other one says use the internet or additional information. One of them is an all electronic vote, and the other one is when you can vote in person. So this is what you're looking for. This is the information on the front of it. So everybody gets one of these letters, and on the back of it you'll see questions and assistance. We train your team, and your team may be a person. In the case of Halifax, there was 12 people, so we trained a couple people, and they trained the rest of them. It's usually about a 3-hour program. But basically, any questions or issues that you have that you call on, it's all taken care of by the help desk. And we have tools that the help desk, and I'll be showing you them, the help desk actually assists voters during the election period. So if you run this over, say, 6 or 7 days, then what you're going to find is that people will, over the course of that time, decide to vote, and they'll, if they have questions or issues or any type of communication that they want to know of how everything went, they'll call the number that you put there. And the tools that you use, you being the help desk agent, they'll look up a series of panels that we have to say, they can tell whether you voted, they can tell if you used the telephone to vote, they can tell everything except how you voted. So it's a very useful thing because there'll be all kinds of strange things that happen. There's also a list of about 20 common questions, and what we do is we provide that list to you. Typically it's posted on your municipality's website, and it goes from there. So a couple things to notice on these. The information that you get under the important information section there deals with the requirements based on the municipality. I don't think there's anything unique in any of the municipalities in Nova Scotia that's unique to the municipality in terms of who can vote. It usually is the Municipal Election Act. There are in different provinces in Canada, there are some things, especially on things like plebiscite information or information as it regards to multiple people. If you have multiple owners of a condo, for example, in British Columbia, only one of those people can vote on behalf of the property. So it's not a person voting. If it's a condo that's owned, it's actually the owner of the condo, and if you're shared, you have to vote amongst yourselves and say, okay, how are we going to vote, or who's going to vote on our behalf. So it's a little strange and different there. It has to do with land ownership. So basically, you would see this. On the back of it, it actually gives the details based on where your civic address is. Here's the councilors that you're going to have to vote for. If you open your package and you look at it and you notice that the councilors are wrong, so I live in Cole Harbour, if I happen to move and move to Bedford, but I don't do anything with Elections Nova Scotia to get that information through, I'm going to get my kit in the mail, and it's going to be redirected by Canada Post to my new address, and I didn't tell anybody I changed addresses, and I'm going to see it says I'm going to vote in Cole Harbour. Well, that's not right, so how do I change that? The system is set up so that you could call into the help desk, and you could talk to them, and you could say, by the way, I moved, and they say, well, according to us, you live in Cole Harbour, and you go, well, no, I moved to Bedford. And if they change your address, what they do is they assign you the new category that's associated with Bedford. And when you go in to vote, the list of candidates you'll see will be the proper candidates. In Halifax, that's reasonably common, that people move around the city or change from one district to the other, and they're not even aware they might have changed. And if they're voting, They don't even notice it till after they vote for the mayor, because everybody gets the same mayoralty candidates. It's when they pull up the list of candidates for what district they're in that they go, oh, that's wrong. So we're the only system with the capability to be able to do that dynamically. And all you do is you call the call center, and you talk to an agent, and they have the capability to change to the proper location. Now, in Ontario, some people said you have to go down to town hall and prove you changed addresses. Almost everybody else just said, no, if you're in the wrong one, because it wouldn't be the first time we've made a mistake on the elector list, then we'll change it based on your say-so. Mike, you have a question?
So Dean, if there's a return to sender, say you moved to Bedford, and you didn't know you got the one in Coal Harbor, and I went back to your company, you research where that person's gone?
Well, no, what happens is typically the return address, so if you notice on the sample there, like on this one, for example, everything, all the return mail would go back to the town of New Scotland. So when we coordinate with you, and in answer to your question, we have done what you just described, that the mail comes back to us. We do that for union voting. Lots of times the unions have people spread out all across Canada, and they'll say, look, we want you to coordinate everything with the mail and return mail. But in the typical case, it would come back, and in Berwick, for example, Janet, who was the clerk there, she had a drawer full of return mail. And when people didn't get their mail and called in, she would just flip through it and say, yeah, your letter's here, just return back to the office, come on down and pick it up. And that's what they did, because they were voting over a week. So typically that's what happens in that one.
Excuse me, so if people are done the list properly, they would call you, they don't call the
No, they would call you, you being the electoral authority. So this is still, for all intents and purposes, we set up the capability for you to fully deal with all the questions from your electorate in your community, because you know them better. I mean, we don't typically staff a big help desk for it. We've done it occasionally for small things, but we train, and it's not trained, like I say, it's 3 hours, you sit down, and I'll show you the screens here today, and you will be able to answer all those questions. If someone says, I didn't get my letter, the first question is, well, I wonder if you're on the list. Okay, so if you look them up and they are on the list, there's a different protocol you follow and say, well, if your mail's missing and your spouse in the household got it, but you didn't, maybe lost in the mail, only 1 day left to vote, I'll issue you a new PIN. How do you know who's calling? How do you check to make sure that person's calling who they say they are? So we build a protocol around that, work with you, and you decide what the threshold is for taking a call and saying, I believe it's you, Fred, on the phone, or, because maybe the call display came up with Fred's number. Or you say, come on down to the town hall and sign a form, which is what they did in one place in Ontario as well, and we'll give you another PIN right here.
Because usually you have to show ID in order to.
And it's interesting because at the polling station, typically you do now, I mean certainly for the provincial and the federal side of it now. So the question is, what do you want to be the threshold for electronic voting? If there's no place that anybody goes, and anytime there's a question you're going to force them to show ID, most people will not come down and vote. They'll say, no, forget about it, this is a pain in the butt. So it's the same for everybody. So there's no advantage or disadvantage. And for hundreds of years, we've just said, oh, you must be the person because you're telling me who you are. It's just recently that we've changed that. And it has nothing to do with electronic voting. It has to do with a question of 100 different things that Election Canada said there's a reason to ask for ID. So it's nothing unique to this. If you want to put a process in place that suggests that any time somebody wants to get something changed, they have to do it in person because there's a prescribed form. The fact of the matter is the bylaw allows you to do things like not take proxies anymore, to deal with all these different issues. Those are all, new legislation says basically what you put in your bylaw supersedes the Municipal Elections Act information. So that affords you that opportunity to change it. Bill 100 that just was done. Yes, sir.
So back to the alleged lost letter. So you do get a caller who phones in and they say, I didn't get my letter. You check your list, this person is legit, they are a registered voter, the letter's gonna arrive, the PIN number is obviously gonna arrive, you issue a PIN number. Is there a way, the system I assume has a way to determine if that PIN number has been used already?
Exactly. The process would always be, okay, you say you didn't get your letter. I mean, somebody might have found it on the street and decided to vote it. So and you don't know. So the first thing the agent does is the agent checks and see whether that pin's been voted, the one assigned to you. If it has not been, they don't read the number to you and say that's the one you're gonna get. They disable that one and they say, okay, we're gonna have a communication that I can figure out for sure who it is that's calling, and I'll give them the new number over the phone, the new PIN number over the phone. If it has been voted, There's already a process in place in legislation in Nova Scotia that says, if I show up at a paper polling station, and I can say, hi, I'm Dean Smith, I'm here to vote, and they go, well, Mr. Smith, it appears you already came down and voted. And I go, whoa, wait a minute, I didn't come down and vote, it's the first time I'm here. There's already a process in place. They say, step over here, sign the document, and we'll give you a ballot. They don't try to find the vote that somebody put in there, because there's no way of finding it. It's all in a box, it's sealed, and you're not gonna get it. Same as in the electronic side of it. If the pin that you say you didn't vote is actually voted by somebody, we can do certain things forensically. I can tell if they phoned in, I can tell which phone number they came in. So I'll look that up and I'll say, gee, phone number you're calling from happens to be the same number that the pin was voted from. Then it's up to the elected official to say, do I believe this person or not? Maybe it was your wife who accidentally voted your pin thinking she was voted her pin. That actually happened before. He's trying to vote the same. There were two sitting up on the fridge, and she took it down. The name's on it, but she just took it down. She voted it, and she voted his pin by accident, never thought about it. He took his, tried to vote it, and said, wait a minute, there's a problem. So then we checked her pin when they called in, and we said, there's the problem. She voted the wrong one. Because he said, my wife already voted a half hour ago, and we looked it up, we can see the location and the time and everything like that. So we just said, vote her pin.
So would that be done by you or done by the returning officer?
No, that would be done, you would have it, your help desk folks have all that information available to them. It's a one-point connection. Now, there may be some things that as an election official, you want to set the rules on, and we typically go through that, and there are a bunch of things that we will tell you, by the way, here's how we suggest you do it, and here are your options. So we go through that. Somebody calling in 10 minutes before the election's ready to stop, and they say, look, I'm at work, and my pin's home on the fridge. I know it's right there, nobody's home, nobody's gonna vote it, believe me, and I'm at work and I'm not gonna get it. Can you give me my pin over the phone? And you go, well, number one, I don't know, can't confirm who you are. And I say, well, look, I'm Dean Smith. So I look it up, pin hasn't been voted, so I cancel it, and I say, Mr. Smith, do you have voicemail? Yes, I do. I'm gonna call you at your office, and you let it ring, and if it says, hi, it's Dean Smith, I'm gonna leave the pin on your phone, and then if you know the password to your email, your voicemail, and you go in and you take it off and you can vote it, that's a reasonable process that mitigates the risk of the problem of not having to vote. So we build all those, they're already established, and we say, here's what you should know, and we train your agents on those scenarios. Okay? So the letter goes out. If you want to add additional security, which is what Halifax is doing, and I mentioned this morning, Halifax is the only one that's ever done this, is they said, we want people to be able to have their date of birth in addition to the PIN number. And we can do that easily. We simply turn on what's called a secondary credential, and if I find this on the street for John Sample from Prince Street, and I find it, if I didn't have to do anything other than enter the PIN to vote, then I could vote on behalf of him. But if I needed to know his date of birth as well, it's not quite as easy to do. Maybe I can find him on Facebook, and all kinds of other places it's stored. It's not an easy, casual thing to be able to do. So Halifax required people in the election there in 2008, we did, to put in the PIN, and oh, by the way, put in your date of birth. Now the only problem with that is sometimes the information on Elections Nova Scotia information month, day were reversed. So, 8th of June, is that the 8th of June or is that August the 6th? So, because it was entered into some government system somewhere in the process, there was some of that. In addition, there's about 1% of people who are on Elections Nova Scotia that do not have their date of birth. It's not on there. It's typically older records. So what we do is right across where you see important information, there was a big bold black line that went across and said, your date of birth is not on file and it is required if you want to vote electronically. Call 1-800 and give them their date of birth and you'll be able to vote electronically. So it's a simple fix. And the system picks it up and says, oh, that person's name does not have a date of birth with it. We'll have to add that comment to the thing. So that's all done electronically by the printer through us, so you don't have to worry about it. So, as an added issue of security, so like I say, most people don't do it, and it does make it more secure, but it's table stakes for Halifax because they're larger, they're worried about more people voting, more concerned about it. So,
if you enumerated, your list would be much more accurate than using Elections Nova Scotia.
yes, it would be, yeah, for sure. It's quite expensive to enumerate nowadays is the problem, yeah. And they do it in like Alberta, for example. Alberta doesn't have, they do provincially, but they don't do municipally, they don't have a voters list. You go and vote in Alberta, you walk in and you sign a form and say you lived here and you've been here for 3 months and you're over 18 and you go vote. There's no list. They have no idea how many ballots to print, how many people are gonna vote. It's interesting. So of course, that creates a problem for us who requires a list before you go. So you get this in the mail. Typically, it'll arrive at your house 5 days before, so we coordinate all that activity. And once that happens, doesn't matter where you are in the world, you can vote. You can vote by phone, anywhere in continental North America, and you can vote by web from anywhere in the world. And after the election, we'll tell you where in the world your voters voted from, each one of them. So we categorize them. We say so many people came from there.
And this can go on like 24 hours a day?
Yep.
So if somebody has, for whatever reason, is voting at 3 o'clock in the morning, then they got a problem,
Yep.
who do they call?
Well, it's up to you when you staff your help desk. Most help desks only function during the work week at the regular municipal office hours. And if you have problems after that, they say call. On election day and the day before, typically they run them, into the evening. That's what we've seen. But if you do have a problem, you wait till the next day and call somebody, and you usually get it resolved. But we've had some really silly questions come in, what you find is people will leave messages at the help desk and say, call us back. You'll also find a lot of people calling in, and instead of voting over the phone, they call the help desk number and they tell you who they want to vote for. So there's 2 800 numbers. One of them is, to vote from, it's on the front. The other one on the back is if you have a problem, call. But they don't read. I can tell you right now, people typically don't read all the information. So there are a lot of people saying, hi, it's Dean Smith. I want to vote for mayor for so-and-so, and let me know when that's done. So the agents call them back in the morning and say, by the way, turn the paper over and call that number, and you'll be able to vote.
Dean, just on that, you mentioned a bit earlier that you can be in the middle of the process and realize that you're in the wrong area, you're in the wrong district. I think you explained earlier that each ballot is a separate part of the voting process, and your PIN is expired for those that you've already confirmed. But if you run into, can you explain if you run into a problem halfway through how that works?
Yeah, so, each race that you run for, the mayoralty race, the councilor race, and the school board race, is actually a separate race. To the system, if you vote for the mayoralty race, so I'm sitting here at work and I'm voting away, and I vote for the mayor's race, and then my ride comes to the door and said, Dean, if you want to ride home, we're leaving right now, so come on. I go, oh yeah, okay. So I shut down my computer. I've only voted the mayoralty race. So I grab my instruction sheet and I go and I jump in the car, and as we're driving along, I pick up my cell phone and I call the 1-800 number. When I get into the voting system, I enter my PIN, and the PIN knows, it looks up and says, which has Dean voted for? Oh, he's voted for the mayor. Next race, oh, councilor, give him the councilor race now. So I can actually change the channel, if you want to think of it that way, from web voting to telephone voting dynamically anytime I want. Until I've successfully dropped the ballot in the ballot box and got a confirmation from the system, then I can continue to do that until all the races I'm eligible to vote, I actually cast my ballot for. So it's a great capability, and it's ironic. It's something like 8 to 10% of the people actually do that, and we couldn't figure out why in Halifax they were doing that. And the reason was they voted the mayoralty race, and then they would see the list of councilors, and they would go to their website. So they'd stop doing what they were doing, and they'd surf over to the councilor website. Every councilor in Halifax had a website in the last election in 2008. And what they started doing is just looking at the councilors in the particular district they had, and figuring out which ones they wanted to vote for. Some of them based on looks, other ones based on policy, I'm sure. But whatever people, why and however people vote. So basically it allows you to, now what happens if I'm voting from here and somebody tells me I gotta go home for a ride, and it's the night of the election, and I leave my paper at work, and I go home and I go, oh my God, I gotta vote those other 2 races, but it's in the office is locked, I can't get back in the office to get it. So I voted the mayoralty race, but I got 2 more races I want to vote. So I call the 800 line, and the clerk looks up my profile and says, well, Mr. Smith, I see you've already voted the mayoralty race. And if I can prove it's me on the phone, they can just give me my PIN number. In lots of other cases, they don't know if somebody's not walking around the office looking for over my desk and go, oh geez, I'm gonna see if I can vote Dean's PIN. Okay? So in a lot of cases, what the protocol is that they'll cancel that PIN and issue a new one. Well, if I issue a brand new PIN to you, you get to vote the mayoralty race again. So how do you make sure that doesn't happen? Well, in actual fact, the elections officials will actually spoil the ballot for the mayoralty candidate, and then tell the people, okay, here's the PIN number, but it'll only let you vote the last 2 races. So it's not uncommon that that's happened, it's a rarity that's happened, but it has happened. It's happened 3 or 4 times in the Ontario elections, the last ones we did, where somebody was partially voting, lost the PIN, and the question was, how do you allow them to vote the rest of the ballot without re-voting the mayoralty race, okay?
What happens in the case where, using your example, where somebody has voted the mayor race and then is gonna go home and vote the other ones, and doesn't get around to doing it? Does the vote for the mayor still count?
Yeah,
Okay, so it's signed off as soon as.
exactly, yeah. It's in the ballot box, in the mayor's ballot box for the mayor's race, if you think of it that way, yeah.
Continuing that same example, if the counselor from that area, or one of the candidates for council from that area looked to see if you voted, and
Yeah.
although you had voted for mayor, will it show?
That he's
them-
voted all, no. Unless you voted all the races and completely voted your PIN, it won't flag it, yeah. Which is what you want to have reflected, actually, when you think about it. Okay, so what I'm gonna do is I'm going to, so this is typically what a municipality So we customize the landing page, what's called the landing page for your particular election. So this is what would happen. Now, in Nova Scotia, when we did Markham's election in last year, 2 years ago, in 2010, they wanted simple Chinese, some form of Cantonese, simple Chinese, Punjabi. They had like 4 different languages they wanted to allow people to vote in. When we did the Liberal Party of British Columbia, the same thing. They had 4 different languages. So we offer French and English as the default. In Nova Scotia last time, basically everybody just wanted English. So now they said, oh, if we start putting in all these different languages, everybody will want their language. It doesn't matter if there's only 10 people in the community. So you tell us which languages you want on there. Anything other than French or English, there's probably going to be a $500 charge for us to create a new language. So if it's Mi'kmaq that you want to put on there for some reason, then we'd have to see whether all the character set for Mi'kmaq is out there. We did it for a couple of Aboriginal First Nations in BC. We put their languages up. So it wasn't easy because we can't tell whether we're doing it properly. And what happens is the system takes chunks of information and parses it together, and the order of verbiage in different languages reorders sometimes. I mean, it makes sense, I guess, probably. We're doing some in Marathi for the state of Maharashtra in India, so we're doing that type of thing to do the languages. But what you'll typically see is French and English. So that probably timed out based on, or whether or not my web session here died on me because of activity. Let me just see where I am.
I notice you're using Internet Explorer while you're doing that. Are you limited by platforms, like there's Firefox and other ones out besides
No,
that, or
we do,
Safari?
Safari, Firefox, Opera, what's it, all the other brands, and what we do is we test them back, so we're back at version 5, we can do actually back to version 5, but anything that renders pages now and graphics, we can typically support. It's interesting, because we're getting a lot of PlayStations and Wii's, people are using those to vote on the web part of it, so from that point of view, it's
Is there a minimum internet speed that people have to do this?
and you know what's funny? No, there isn't, but most of the default phone voting speeds or the dial-up internet speeds support it really well. We don't do a lot of caching, or of imaging, and you'll see when we bring up the actual slide that there's no imaging really there. It's all textual information with a couple character boxes. But in Ontario, it's surprising the number of people who we knew had relatively slow internet in the area used the internet to vote instead of picking up the same device, the phone, and calling in on the phone and voting. So internet is faster in voting on our system, probably by twice as fast on average, because it's a visual thing, click, click. Whereas in the phone, you gotta listen to the instructions, listen for your candidate, figure out what number it was, and push that associated button. So it is a little different. Just let me see, I'll reopen I've dropped the internet connection here. Oh, I did. I'm gonna fix that, but see if my rocket stick from Rogers will allow me to get on the internet. So one of the things that's important to understand when you're looking at the pros and cons of adding additional forms of voting or alternative forms of voting, as you go down the road and you get questions from your counselors or from constituents on what's involved, it's where it is in Canada from a technology point of view. It's becoming, for all forms of government, it's becoming a web presence to deliver government services, and most of you know that is becoming pretty significant. What we've got. That's interesting. My Roger stick is emitting some kind of a signal. That was almost glowing the right color. So like there are, the idea of having a lot of government services delivered electronically is certainly become a requirement in a lot of them. In Ontario, if you delivered your elections in 2010, you had to write an entire document to the government describing how you dealt with the accessibility issues. So in January of 2010, new legislation went in place for the Disabilities Act in there and said, you have to put in place for all your websites, anything done on the website has to be customizable to be able to support what are called W3C, which are the international compliances for websites for disabled viewers. And our system already does all that. So what you've got is the capability to be able to look at a system like ours and say, what exactly could we do for our system and in Ontario and satisfy our requirements. So we wrote a document for them once the election was finished, and it showed all the things that could be done by, were done by our system, and everybody that used our system just changed the name on the bottom and submitted it as the government information. So what you will see is a lot of information that supports internet voting, telephone voting. All those things now are supported in terms of services that have to be supported in Ontario. So that's certainly a more robust or demanding environment. All right, now. This is glowing a color, but I don't know that it's glowing the right color.
What's that?
So we see it trying, this usually glows blue to show me it's got high speed, so this is glowing pink, so I'm not sure what the Rogers coverage is here, but it seems to be working, so.
It's only 2G, it's not very fast.
Is that right? That may be why, yeah. Okay, so the first thing that you see is a relatively clean screen. And the reason that the screen is clear, once again, is because embedded behind all the imaging and all the boxes and everything on here are what are called tags. And if you have disabled voters who are blind, they are using the internet nowadays using screen readers. And what they do is they simply move a device across the screen, and what it does is it picks up the tags and it tells them what's on the screen. So the number of, the number of visually disabled individuals now that can read Braille is very, very small. That's an older generation skill. It's all the assist tools that are available now. And on the web, lots of folks who are visibly disabled are using the web to surf. And behind our imaging and things that we have on our screen, there's a standard that we follow that ensures that those people can use our information. It doesn't fix the problem of finding out and mailing them out a PIN and expecting them to open their mail and read it. And in Huntsville, we had two individuals who were married to each other and they lived in the same household. And what they did is the town knew that they were both blind, and they emailed them. And because they can get their email and use the same screen reader, and they created PDFs of their voter letters, and they actually voted. First time ever they voted without assistance. And there's a great story up there in Huntsville that talked about basically what you can do with disabled features, disabled individuals, and the features that the system offered in order to do it. So pretty straightforward. You get that information, it prompts you. That first part was, everybody's seen those before, those captcha challenge, those things to make sure robotic entries aren't entering and coming into your system.
Others are not case sensitive though.
That's right, and you don't do that because people don't know, and they don't know whether there's a space in there or anything like that. You can put it in upper, lowercase with spaces or not spaces, and it'll always assume that you put it in based on the comparison to the correct one. We can make them a lot fuzzier with more lines in them, we just change the scale to make it higher, but we find this, it's called a scale of 6, but if you get up a scale of 8, you'd probably guess 2 or 3 times before you got the right stuff. So you try to make it so that a robotic system can't get in, but not so bad that an average individual can't say, oh, that looks like an A. So I just hit enter on that, like you can click the button or you can hit the enter key, so this is running at about 2G speed, that's for sure, unfortunately. So, based on the PIN number that just went in, this says that this person lives in District 1, and he's gonna vote for the mayor and the councilor and the school board. If the councilor in this particular ward or district was in by acclamation, you would see that the person, they would actually say Councilor District 1 acclaimed, and it would put the name of the person in there, okay? And that's one of the things also that, maybe not to you, but it is surprising to a lot of people that not everybody knows who's running for council in their particular district, and they don't even know if their particular district has an acclamation, or if they have for mayor or for anything else. So this is telling me exactly what I'm going to vote for in terms of the races that are there. Pretty much looks like a simple, straightforward ballot. And the ability to be able to click any of the particular boxes, and so this is time. This shows you how slow that is. You usually don't even see the clock. It happens so quick with a regular one. So this says, please select one of the following. So what happens if I try to select another one? Okay. So I go in there and I do the selection. So I don't know if you read that or not. You're only allowed to select one option for this race. You may deselect an option by clicking it again. So I can turn off the Robert Stanfield simply by clicking it and then reselecting somebody else. In our system, every action that's an erroneous action, you say specifically what you did wrong, and you specifically say what you do to fix it. And it has to be written in a grade 6 level. So science behind how we phrase that, where it's located, the colors that are used to do it, those are all things that are important to draw attention to the fact that there's something red on the screen now. So what we've learned over the years is there's a lot of science behind how you do this, and it's us learning it, but at the same time it's us getting the information from the industry that says this is what you have to do to make sure this is right. So this is the first part that comes down that says, okay, here's who you selected on the ballot. Is this really what you meant to do? And if you say yes, that's exactly who I wanted to vote for, you click the Vote Now button. If you say no, I'm rethinking this, I'm going to go back and I'm going to click on Return to Ballot. It'll repost all the candidates again. Take the X out and say go ahead and start from scratch on it. So I'm just going to click Vote Now on that. And what it's going to do is it's going to come up and it's going to tell me that your ballot has been dropped in the ballot box, okay? So once again, I apologize for the slow speed, but there it is, okay? So at this point in time, you've dropped the ballot in the ballot box and you can't change it. Nothing more can be changed associated with that race. If I disconnect now using the exit button and I go home, I can vote from home on the web or the internet, and I can vote by phone any place I want to as well. So this is pretty straightforward. I don't know if anybody has, anybody have multi-select races in the council race? Pick 2 from a list, or do you have an open ward system where you're picking, yeah. So that's fairly common too. The question of whether or not you allow people to undervote the ballot or plunk it, in most cases you can't stop them when you open the ballot box and you see that it's there. You can, if you want, prevent them from undervoting the ballot. It's usually not done because it's a voter's right to only vote for the candidate that they want, even if there's 6 or 7 they could choose from. But you cannot spoil the ballot by overvoting it. So in this case, in all these things, if I decide to just hit the submit button here and not mark any of the ballot, then I'm spoiling the ballot. It comes up and it says, you are eligible to select one person here. You haven't selected anybody. If you continue on, your ballot will be considered spoiled and will not be counted. Is this really what you want to do? So answer yes or no to that question, or go back to the ballot and mark it, okay? So it expressly says, what the problem is and what you're about to do. Now, the concept of a spoiled ballot by legislation in Nova Scotia is if you can't discern the voter's intent. So when you're using electronic voting, the only thing you can do is click in the box to the right. You can't put your initials on, you can't select too many people. The only thing you can do is basically not mark the ballot or mark the ballot properly. So the incidence of spoiled ballots in the paper voting world is usually 0.5%. And we've seen it as high as, get this, 19%. 19% of all the people, so you'd say, well, the instructions are pretty bad. The mail-in ballot in Smiths Falls in 2000, in their 2006 election, they used a brand new supplier of mail-in balloting. And all you had to do was sign the form, put it in the envelope, and send it back, and then put your ballot in another one, put it in, and send it back. The problem was, the envelopes were pre-addressed. The number of people who did not put their signed card in, but just put the ballot in and mailed it back, basically 19% of the people. So when they open the thing up and they go, well, we don't know who sent this in, we can't strike anybody off the list, and we don't even know if it's an original ballot, they might have photocopied it, and this is the 400th one they mailed back. So they had a terrible, terrible situation. And they put the thing, they put the sheet that had their name on it in the same envelope where the ballot was. So when they opened the outer envelope and said, oh gee, there's none, I wonder if it's inside this one, they had to get a court order to agree that if they opened it and saw it was there, they could take that out and pass the ballot to a second person. And it was a significant number of people. Moral of the story is if you have an electronic voting system, the idea and the probability of having spoiled ballots is virtually none. We did have in Halifax, in one of the districts, a recount. And in the Halifax election, there was 116 electronic ballots that people had spoiled. There was over 12,000 people in the region that could vote, or in the district that could vote. And they had I think close to 800 or 1,000 paper votes that were spoiled as well. So in that riding alone, in that district alone, there's a lot of instances of spoiled ballots. So what they did is the judge said, I want to understand how you spoil a ballot electronically. The clerk said, so basically somebody has to say, I want to spoil it, and yes, I'm sure, and it drops it in. In the other case, it was a paper spoiled ballot. It took them 3 minutes to agree that all 116 people that spoiled it electronically, that was the voter's intent, no question. In all the other ones, they took 3 days to go through that, because they had to recount everything. And they come up with this, and basically they had a bunch of spoiled ballots, some of which ended up being not spoiled. And the moral of the story is when you go all electronic, the only spoiled ballots are there that the intent of the voter is very, very clear as to what that intent is. This is going to time out on me if I don't.
So does that mean there's no recount?
Well, you know, it's funny, in Perth, in Ontario, they put a bylaw in place when they put it in, and it was all electronic. They said there is no recount. They're the only place in Ontario that did. Everybody else goes, well, wait a minute, there may be all kinds of reasons why they wanted your recount. In electronic balloting, they said it doesn't make any sense, and council passed it. They said, you're right. If that's the rule, if they can't do it, and the system was demonstrated to them, this is telling me I got 1 minute left, so I'm going to vote for Sid.
So I guess that's up to each municipality what they want to do.
Yeah, obviously if you have paper voting as well, you can't remove it, but you're right, it's, yeah.
Is that timing in there just for purposes of your demo, or would that be
No,
on
we
regular voting?
set it at 5, because otherwise you got resources on the system being held up forever, so it's set at 5 minutes currently, which is usually more than long enough. Okay, and the last one, we all know in Nova Scotia, if I come up and I ask for whichever school board ballot I want, you have to give it to me. If I ask for the African Nova Scotia ballot and I don't look African Nova Scotian, or you don't know if I have an African Nova Scotian child, by law you have to give me that ballot as well. So in this case, that's what we're doing here. We're saying just give me a ballot, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask for this particular ballot. It's getting slower. I'm going to ask for the regular school board. By the way, if you ask for the French school board ballot, the rest of your ballot selection will be in French. So that's typically what's done in most places now. If you want to, all your instructions and everything will revert to French. So I'm going to say I'm going to be voting the school board ballot, and what this will do is we'll say, okay, if you're in this particular district, I'm going out and I'm finding them, and Danny Galvin, Rick Mercer, and Anne Murray are the candidates. Okay. So what I'm going to do at this point in time, I say, oh gee, I got to go home. I'm going to hit the exit button down here, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, I'm going to jump in my car and I'm going to see if I can I'm gonna vote for the last race, and I'm gonna use the phone, I'm gonna use the same PIN I entered. So, and to do this, I'm gonna turn this back on and see whether or not this chirps at me again in the same ugly way. So in this case, I'm gonna just use the phone voting capability of my BlackBerry, or, you know, it could be any particular, and what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna call, this is working well. We'll see how it chirps. Okay, so I'm gonna dial it.
Welcome to the Town of New Scotland Municipal Election. Using your touch-tone phone, please enter your PIN now, followed by the pound key. The pound key or number sign key is located to the right of the 0 key. Your voter credentials are being validated. This race is for the regional school board.
So it knows I voted the other
Select
ones.
one of the following. To select Danny Gallivan, press 1. To select Rick Mercer, press 2. To select Anne Murray, press 3. Press the star key to repeat the list of
So
options.
I'm gonna select Anne Marie.
Recording selection. You have selected Anne Murray. To confirm this selection, press the pound key now, or to change your selection, press 0 now. The pound key is located to the right of the 0 key.
It's not on this phone, by the way.
Your selection has been recorded for Anne Murray. Thank you for participating in the Town of New Scotland municipal election. Goodbye.
Okay, so if you have an open word and you do multi-selects, it'll say, here are the candidates, and it'll list the candidates. It'll say for Dean Smith, press 1, for, you know, candidate 1, press 1, for candidate 2, press 2, you know. And as you press them, it'll say, make your next selection. So if I press 1, it'll say, make your next selection. And when you're finished making all your selections, it'll say, you have selected, and it'll read the individual names of each of the candidates. Yeah.
So if you've got 20 people running, is it gonna go through that 20 people?
Yep. Yep. And we had in Stratford in Ontario. Yeah. In Stratford in Ontario, they had 23 people on the ballot. On the list.
We had 22 in Digby.
Is that right? Yeah. Yeah. It's not unusual to get long lists. I mean, people do sit there and listen to it, because if you pick, I don't know, you pick 6? You pick 6 from the list? Yeah. So, and what you'll simply do is pick, now if you have 22, we'll give 2-digit numbers to each one. So they'll start at 10. And they'll go from there. So, you know, you'll hit 11, and then you'll hit 16, and then, see, all their names and the associated numbers with them will be on the back of the form as well. So that's a cheat sheet if you want to think of it that way. Every time we've done large elections and we've had that, it's slower. You know, you might be on the phone for 4 minutes, but it works. As a matter of fact, in Stratford, over 70% of the people voted the entire slate. They had to vote 8 from a list of 23. That's how many people do it. So. And that was on the phone voting part of it. Obviously on the web, it's click, 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 click. And on the web, the question is, should I put them in one column? Because people who don't fit on the screen on the first part of it are off the screen, and you have to scroll to get them. So what we do is we say, talking to the election authorities, do you want 3 columns, 2 columns? Like, how do you want it paginated so that you can ensure that nobody says, I wasn't even on the freaking front page. Like, no wonder I didn't get my votes. I'm contesting the election for some reason. So.
Is there a role for barcodes? I don't know if you look.
Well, if you use paper-based polling as well, so you're going to have people come in. When people come into the polling station, the first thing you're going to say is, well, I wonder if you voted electronically from your car or from your home, you know? So the first thing they have to do is look up the person's name. So we usually include a barcode, and it's also good for return mail. So when the mail comes back to the clerk's office, because it was undelivered, you'll actually see where it says John Sample there. We put a barcode in there, and it's not the PIN number, it's a lookup code. So you can just go ching, you don't have to open the mail, and you can cancel the PIN if you want that way. So it is used in This is, it's not on the mock-up, but it is used in the regular version of what we do. Okay, so, I'll scoot through this, the rest of this stuff quickly and get into some of the modules there. Where we've done the elections before, so as I mentioned, we did municipal elections. Most of the municipal elections that we've dealt with now are in Ontario. We did them in 2006 up to 2008 and 2009 where we had by-elections. We had 34 at the same time in 2010. Two other small companies that operate in Ontario only did 5 each. And most of them, one of them is a company called Dominion Voting that has scanners, so they have to offer an additional valued service in order to compete with us. Because scanners, if you have 30,000 mail-in ballots, it's not a bad idea maybe to get scanners and scan them through. So they're finding that we took a lot of their customers away, so they introduced an internet-only voting option that allows you to use their system. So they got 5 of their other customers who were doing a lot of scanning, Peterborough, for example, a large city, that did scanning as well. So they were doing it just in advance voting, and they did something called a 2-step registration. You know, raise your hand if you want to vote electronically, okay? We're gonna mail something out to you. Fill out a form, go online, fill it out. It gets sent back to us, pick a secret code, and we'll send you another pin in the mail, and people just don't do it. You might get 6% of the people deciding to do it, it's almost not worth doing it if you do it that way, for sure. We talked already a little about political leadership elections. We've done 6 in the last 20 months. The October 2008 elections in HRM and Berwick, Windsor, and Stewiacke. And unions elections, we do the federal government's union elections from the CIRB. So the federal government that requires any 2 unions that are competing for the same union workforce, the federal government is required by law to run that election. And so what we've been doing for the last 3 years, we've been doing their elections electronically, and it's gone from about a 46% vote rate to over 90%. Like, it's really, really easy for these folks. So we do the Brink security drivers, the Purelator drivers, the NAV Canada, Teamsters, Canadian Auto Workers. They're all major unions in Canada now are using our system to do that type of work.
The HRM, I understand, are continuing with electronic voting, and I believe it didn't go to your firm.
No, and
Is there a reason that you know of why you didn't get a second time around?
yeah, and I'm on CBC a lot talking about that. To be perfectly honest, there was the information was in 2 stages. The first part of it was a technical evaluation, and the second part was a pricing evaluation. 2 called sealed envelope bids. So we put our bid in one envelope, our financial bid in one, and we put our technical one in the others. When we reply to these type of things, it's usually between 160 to 200 pages of technical information and stuff like that. They restricted it to 33 pages. So there's a Spanish company, Seidel, which, you know, I'm not going to knock Seidel. Seidel's a good company. They're successful in Europe and some other places. They typically sell a $3.5 million computer system complete with voting capability to the government. So in Norway and in India and in Spain and a lot of the other places where they've sold their technology, but they've never delivered elections. They're involved in elections, but they don't do what we do. They don't know what a 10A form is in Nova Scotia, and they won't. They had the technical evaluation, we won. We had the best technical solution of the 4 companies that bid it, and not surprising because HRM knows us very well. But then in part of that evaluation, there was 2 sections where Seidel ranked very close to us. One of them was on project management. And our idea of project management is we have 10 people on staff that worked on the HRM project across the street basically from HRM. We got 9 points out of 10 on that. They got 10 points out of 10, and they're going to manage the project from Spain. So we said, well, wait a minute now, that sounds a little strange. The other one was your knowledge of HRM and the requirements for elections run in Nova Scotia in an electronic mode. We're the only ones that have ever done that. So we got 24 out of 25 points for that. Seidel, the other company, got 23. So anyhow, when we saw this come out, we called our counselors who were gonna vote on it that night. And you can get disqualified if you do that. But I called my counselor, which I can do. So I called her and I said, there's something wrong here. We're looking at the scoring and it doesn't make sense to us. What we'd like to do is ask the counselors voting on this tonight to ask the companies to come in and do presentations as a last part of it. So, and to validate, because if I could tell you in 33 pages, I'm just as good as in televote, and that's what they did. But if you had to put the 160 pages in, we would have talked about the customization of the 10A form, of the requirement to have school board elections in Nova Scotia require a statement that says which form do you want, how do you do it. Their system won't do that. So anyhow, they're building and changing their system now that they want it to try to meet those requirements. So we still may get it, but there's a 2-month window that they can prove that they can do everything. They have never done phone voting linked to their internet voting, and we said, like, if you had to prove that, wouldn't that have disqualified them? So we had a meeting with HRM. They were very concerned about it. They really wanted us to win. The moral of the story is we bid $300,000 more than the competitor. We bid a little over $800,000. They bid $500,000. And the reason we did that, we bid the exact same price we did 4 years ago, and we decreased another part of it, and we got a better price on our mail-out service, and we put that bid in. They threw a low bid in, and they called us afterwards, they being Seidel, and said, guys, we had no idea that we'd win this. We just wanted to piss in your cornflakes, because they wanted us to have problems on it. So we're anxious to wait and see what happens, but technically we're a better company, we're more competent, we have people, and it's been written up in the newspaper on the whole idea of whether or not you should be buying local. You shouldn't buy my product just because I'm local. You should buy it because I have the best product and the best price. So everybody's kind of disappointed in me by saying, no, don't buy local, because that's the issue that's in the paper now. Should we buy local? Should council put a 5%
Especially
benefit?
if you're saying buy local, it's hard for you to compete in Scotland and.
Exactly my point, because that's like, I've got to compete all over the world, and buying local, and people say, well, don't go try to shop in Nova Scotia because they're gonna give it to the local guy anyhow. So I'm not a big supporter of that, that's my own personal opinion, but from an IT point of view, I gotta sell across the
So
world.
you have no reason to believe it had anything to do with the dissatisfaction of the service you gave them in 2000?
Oh, as a matter of fact, we can categorically say, you call Kathy Millett, who's the clerk there now, and you ask her about us, all over the world, she's our reference. And they actually thought, and Louis Conteno, I don't know if you know Louis, he's the CAO for Windsor, sat on the committee. So Louis is gonna use our service again this time, but he was so disappointed because we won technically, and then they opened it and said, oh my God, what did Televote do? We didn't do anything, we bid the exact same price, a 4-year-old price. We thought, should we change it? We should increase it a little because our costs have gone up, but it didn't happen that way. So it's an interesting issue for us. It's not sour grapes, it's just ranking of the process, and I was on CBC, I've been on a couple of radio talk shows, and all my point is, I don't know how you can say you're comparing apples to apples if all you've got is 33 pages. And the one we did in India, we beat Seidel in India, in the state of Maharashtra, with 100 million people and 400 elections. And now the whole project's on hold because the government's deciding what they're going to do. But for us, we spent a lot of money over there winning that bid, and they said, technically, you guys have done this all over the world, and especially in Canada. We know you can do the job, and that's why we were selected with our Indian partners. So we're comfortable we can win, but we never know when somebody's looking to buy the business, and they did the same thing with the NDP party. That's the other one. Their price was, we went in and made the pitch to the executive of the NDP party for the election to replace Mr. Layton, and their price, Seidel's price was, we don't care what Televote bids, give us last chance and we'll beat it. Tell us what they bid and we'll beat it. And we said, well, how can you do that? It's not illegal because they didn't put an RFP out. In the municipal world, you'd be killed doing that. You just can't do business that way. Anyhow, that's political stuff, so we live with those and die with them. What I wanted to do is briefly, just in talking about participation, this is an important point. You can't run around saying that everything's going to increase participation because you throw electronic voting at it. It will, on average, increase. In almost every event we've done, certainly in the union side of it, it's gone ballistic. It's gone quite high in terms of voter participation. In 2008, they decided they were going to trial electronic voting, and they ran it for 3 days, the Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, or Saturday, Sunday, Monday, sorry. And then election day was the 18th. So almost 2 full weeks before the election, before the mayoralty debates and anything were on TV, they said, okay, electronic voting stopped. So what we're going to do now is on election day, we're gonna do paper voting. In 2004, and remember what else happened in 2004, the Sunday shopping question was on the ballot, so there's a lot more people interested in voting, but the advanced poll in Halifax had a little over 15,000 people. In 2008, when we did it just electronically, it more than doubled, or it almost doubled, I should say, in terms of the total numbers. So the numbers don't relate because they're 2 different years and there was more voters in 2008. So percentage-wise, it was 28%. So a pretty significant thing. And there's some of the stats. This is a little harder to see perhaps, but interesting things on, for example, the number of females who voted electronically is almost 10% higher than the number of males that vote electronically. And that's even adjusted for the fact that there are more females in HRM that are eligible to vote. Internationally, there was 135 people that were outside of Canada, and phone votes, there was just 23 that were from outside, and it was almost 14 metric tons of CO2 that weren't put into the airs because people didn't jump in cars and drive. So we worked with Dalhousie University, what's called a carbon calculator built on this. So it ends up being an interesting discussion on what exactly you can do if you throw electronic voting in and let everybody go to the polls exactly a year later. So if you look at the two things here, this is voting by age group. So that's an interesting thing that happens. When you vote electronically and you don't use paper, you can actually profile the demographics of who's voting in your election. So for candidates, an interesting thing, and this is what they're very interested in, who is voting in the election and who isn't. So if you look at this, there's a significant increase in the number of people who voted, younger voters who voted in the second part of it. This is, instead of trying to compare them, there's actually what it is. Your 40s, 50s, and 60s, this type of age group, they'll vote in a hurricane. Like it's, that is your segment that comes out. The older population, the more they use and the more they see this stuff, the more interested they are in using electronic voting. To assume that just because you're older, you won't use technology, they all use the phone, and that's where the majority of them vote. I'd say just over the majority. But one thing you should see is that in 2009, there's a week. Instead of 6 polling stations set up, they set up 1, and that's what Halifax is doing this year. So Halifax is setting up 78 polling stations, and they typically have, I think, 180. So their savings are coming almost $800,000 from the cost of not having to run all these extra polling. They fully expect with 8 days of voting that they're going to have some 70% of the people who participate in the election are actually going to participate electronically. So why would you consider electronic voting? And we touched on this briefly this morning, but one of the interesting things here is that choice and flexibility is what makes this important. Don't try to sell it that you're going to triple your turnout or anything like that. When councillors, when I present to council, I remember one of my colleagues was presenting in Ontario, and one of the councillors was adamant about the fact that older voters wouldn't use this, and there was an older lady in the gallery who stood up and said, "I'm tired of you people telling us what we can't do. Let us decide one way or the other. Just give us the opportunity, let us do it. If we can't do it, we won't. We'll go to the old mode." But, and it's clear, if you offer choice to them, the question is, can you afford to offer this and paper? If you're gonna do the exact same thing, it's the cost of whether you're prepared to do an experiment. HRM, for the first year in 2008, put money away in each of the previous years to say, we're gonna do a trial, we're gonna put extra money away. In their case now, they're saving money. They're saving, $800 grand on an election that is now going to cost them significantly less on a go-forward basis in everything they do. Immediate auditable results are there. The voter intent's clear. We talked about no spoiled ballot and the fact that it's environmentally positive. Provincial accessibility issues, we talked about that. Huntsville in northern Ontario had because of the Elections Abilities Act that went in that said how you had to make all the locations accessible and deal with all the accessibility issues. They saved $11,000 simply by going electronically because they decided not to open any polling stations and they went all electronic. They had, well, actually I shouldn't say that, they had one at Town Hall and that was already accessible. So the whole point there for them was that they didn't have to spend money, they actually spent it on electronic voting. They didn't change the budget. It actually got cheaper but they spent the money, they wanted to buy PCs for the office, so they went and bought PCs for the office and counted it in their election budget because it was already there, so how they wanted to spend their money. Voter participation, it does impact it, but the most significant thing is the cost in the polling stations. You're not gonna have to have, you know, when you think about it, if somebody told you today you're gonna have 75% fewer voters going to the poll, or even 50% fewer voters going to the poll, what would you do? Would you change the number of polling stations, or would you just hire fewer people? If your cost is that you gotta print ballots, you gotta staff, and what you're gonna do is try to figure out how you can actually save money by introducing electronic voting, it might be a tough sell. If your advanced polling period, and this is what Kentpo was talking about when we were pitching to them the other day, they said, maybe what we'll do is in the advanced poll, we won't have paper advanced polling. So all the costs associated with staffing and everything, why don't instead we just have an electronic advanced polling, and then on election day, if you wanna vote by paper, come on down and vote. But up to that point in time, just throw your ballot in electronically. So that's more, you know, there was Kings County, there was Berwick and Windsor. There was a lot of the folks at that presentation who were kind of in the same mindset. They want to try it, now what they're gonna do is see how they can put the pieces together to make it something that they would do. So here are the common questions we hear a lot. We have a lot of older voters, and we know they vote, and they won't like it or use it. And the fastest growing segment of online users for the Royal Bank, for online banking, is silver surfers. It's people over the age of 65. And you might suggest that's because the younger demographic is already using it. But what we do find now is my mom's 85, she lives in Florida, she's on Facebook, she's emailing. The number of people that use social media as the mechanism to communicate with their grandchildren or somebody else, family members, they're online now. You shouldn't assume they're not. It's almost demeaning to suggest that they can't understand it, or they're not in a household where it's being used and they can get assistance from somebody there to help them vote. The other thing is, most counselors, when they talk about this issue, say, you know, I know lots of older voters and, you know, they won't vote using this. They don't know whether or not there's 4 times that amount that are infirmed or can't get out or need a ride or for some reason are disenfranchised. And what you're going to do is you may end up getting a significant number of older voters participating simply because you don't know that they're not participating now. I defy anybody to suggest they go back in at the electors list on a paper vote and look at all the people that didn't vote and then try to figure out their age and then put a demographics in place and say, oh gee, we didn't get a very good turnout at the old age group. Or we saw lots of gray-haired folks because they tend to vote more, and maybe we're getting a great turnout from them. It may be a pathetic turnout. Statistically, you can't do it. If you use electronic voting, and we did, we did in Halifax, 2008, a by-election in 2009, there was the highest turnout of any by-election ever they had. They tripled the number of people that turned out in a by-election simply by offering electronic voting. So the question is, they may not use it, they can use the telephone, they use it, or have them come down to the polling station and do the same thing. Or if you're gonna go all electronic, still have a polling station, but have them come in and sit at a desk where you can assist them in doing it.
This may not need to be written into a system, but I have to ask the question. Is there anything in this to prevent some of what I would call probably like a strong arming influence, where I put my laptop under my arm and I go from door to door and say, have you voted, would you like to vote, I'll bring my laptop in, you're able to vote electronically.
Yeah.
As a candidate, that would give me the ability to have a rather strong influence on how they vote during that session. But there's nothing that prevents that, I presume.
No, there isn't.
I'm not allowed into the polling booth under a manual system,
Right.
but in that sense, I'd be allowed into the polling booth.
Am I allowed to offer you a drive to the polling station now?
Yes, but I'm not allowed to go into the polling booth
Right.
with you, but if
So-
I go in your house with my
So,
laptop.
and I understand your question, because and this comes up a lot, one of the things is that most people can use the phone. And if I knock on your door and I'm campaigning and I've got a laptop under my arm, you will probably, if it's hard to vote, if it's hard for you to vote, and I've got a rocket card like I have here and I come in and set up and do that, there's no law now that suggests that's not. So the question would be, are you doing something illegal? And that would be the question. Our system can't prevent certain IP addresses from coming into the system. They would get a different IP address depending on how they were connecting into the network. So we could never even find out that it's APC. I can tell if
So
it's
it's more of a
phone
moral
call.
issue than it is an operational issue anyway, isn't it?
I would say so, yeah, for sure. It's a good question and it has come up before. And the real question is, to what extent, given the fact that everybody and their dog finds it's easier to vote this way, statistically, could you actually influence an election by going door to door and doing this and finding people who would actually do it without somebody else complaining? So if you offered to come in and do it at my house and I said, well, I think you're a stupid candidate, and what are you doing this? I'm gonna call somebody and complain, probably the clerk. And then you're gonna have to make up a rule or something that says you can or cannot do it. Can I drive you to the poll, please, on the way down, and tell you all the great things about why you should vote for me? I don't know. It's not our question to worry about. We can't prevent it, is the answer to your question, unfortunately. And that really comes up in here. How do you know who's voting the pin is the other question. Some people are suggesting in some households, some religions, the head of the household makes the decision. I want you to all vote for this candidate, and I'm the head of the household. And people are going, oh, geez, in Canada, you can't have that. Well, culturally, in some places, that's respect for the head of the household. So who are we to say? If you think it's an abusive relationship and you're trying to do it, and we hear this a lot, what's to prevent the battered wife syndrome from somebody forcing them to vote? Well, you can go into the washroom and vote in basically about 50 seconds. You can use the phone and vote for, so if you can find 50 seconds, or you can, vote for your candidate of your choice, and then when somebody says later, we're gonna vote for it, say, oh, I already voted, and I already voted for that guy, so I did exactly as you told me. They'll never know, because nobody can tell. So it's an issue, it comes up, there's no pat answer for it. Let's face it, if I'm in an abusive relationship and I want to tell my wife how to vote, I'm going to grab her pin and I'm going to go vote it. I'm not going to ask her to vote it. I'm going to take it and I'm just going to do it myself.
If I go to vote, if I went to vote on that system, and the counselor in my district got in by acclamation, but I don't know that,
Right.
will it tell me that?
Yes, it will, yeah.
It
Yeah.
doesn't just show up, not their name, not on there?
That's right. What happens is, in the preamble, when you first get in, it says, oh, you're in District 2, by the way, and it'll flash up and it'll say, you're gonna vote for the mayor, but in District 2, there's an acclamation, this person won by acclamation. So it's a preamble that's up there. And by the way, on the back part of your list, it'll have that exact same thing. So if you look, not everybody reads it, I'll reiterate that, but if you look at the counselor's name, it'll say, there will be no vote, there's no election for this race, so-and-so has won by acclamation. And actually for school board, it's fairly common, at least in most of the places in Ontario, it's fairly common.
On that, how could it be on that list if that's being mailed in advance?
It's being mailed after the candidate date, after the candidate cutoff date, because we don't know who to put on here, but once the candidate list is set, we electronically store that, and then this is generated specifically for you. So if you're in District 2 and there's no council race, we actually put it on there, so that's how you know as well. So.
Dean, is there a flag on the IP addresses? For example, what would stop a candidate from setting up a very comfortable headquarters with all kinds of bells and whistles and a computer there that people can come in, vote in the nice comfort, get freebies, etc.? Is there a flag for repeated IP addresses coming from the city?
Yeah. Basically, if you go to any of the leadership conventions that we went through, that's done in every one of them. Every one of the candidates has a candidate room, and you go in and it's well-appointed, it's got free drinks, and it's got PCs. And it's the same thing. You got this, now, that's a little different. Is it illegal for you to have a party at your place and as a candidate?
A voting party.
Yeah, and so the question would be, maybe that's a great way to do it. You can the only people that get to vote are the people who are eligible to vote and have a pin. So it's not like you're gonna generate another 1,000 votes for yourself, because those people are out there, and there may very well be that there's more people voting, so any particular act out there is gonna be equally, diminished, I guess, by more people voting. So they may all vote for you, it's hard to say. It's an interesting discussion, because I think in the political leadership events we've done, it's the norm. They all do it, and for that very reason, come on in, have a beer, sit down, we'll help you vote. And it's usually over a period of time if they do that. And just to finish off this, someone didn't get a pin, can't vote. We already see that there's a very elegant process to make sure that those people get enumerated, get their stuff, and get to vote. Costs, is it the same? Is it more expensive? Is it cheaper? If you switch from paper-based voting in Nova Scotia, it's typically between $4 and $6 per eligible elector. On a provincial election, it's between 7 and 9, and federally it's 13. So if your budget falls somewhere in the 4 to 6 range, you put in the total cost of just electronically, and you'll typically save, most people save up to 40% of the cost of their elections. And it's a staffing cost. If you're gonna have the same thing, if you're gonna have people staffing a paper polling station, then you're gonna have to get creative. And one of the ways to say is don't have advanced polls, because there's a cost associated with that. And actually, at the end of the advanced polls, you will know what percentage of your voters have already voted. So you'll see on day one, you'll have a big spike on day one, and on the last day, you'll have a big spike. 30% of the people that vote electronically vote on election day. They have all week to do it, they wait till election day to do it.
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
Say my friend Bill wants to run against me, and I've been to this information session, and he hasn't. And I can see how something like this could give a city councilor material advantage. So my friend Bill, would he get some sort of information automatically from you, so he would have the same benefit that I would from this?
Yeah, and I'm gonna show you the candidate module. It is the session here that, like, for example, an education session for candidates. In the Halifax election, once again, in 2008, we ran sessions. We won one in Halifax and one in Dartmouth. The city put it on and said, anybody who's an eligible candidate, and the definition of their eligible candidate was past their date, because they were all going out and campaigning, and they wanted to make sure that everybody going out there understood how this system worked. So for the first 15 minutes, we'd say, here's a demo, here's how it works, and now, here's what your tool is. This is the candidate module, watch as we show you what you can do. And they all sat there and salivated and said, oh my God. So somebody who's new and doesn't have any support from a bunch of people who want to make sure he stays in office, and somebody who's been in office forever and has a big team, they're equal, basically. Click, show me who's voted, who hasn't. I mean, it's a great equalizer. He pitched it to the Democratic Party in the state of Illinois. They hated it. They said, no, no, no. We're the incumbents. We've got the money. We don't like that idea. So it is what it is. I just want to briefly touch on this. So Section 146, and most of you know this, this is where the vote by mail, electronically, or by other means. So this changed slightly. The policies and procedures, so in the handouts that we've given to you, there's some policies and procedures stuff that assist you in going through and understanding how this is done. You have to basically, your bylaw has to address these, and once again, if you use a single page bylaw, you make the reference to this other stuff in your policies and procedures, and just say, by the way, the bylaw deals with, all these issues are dealt with in the policies and procedures. That's kind of a living, breathing document, because if you have to change it as it comes up for some reason, that's where you typically do it. The other thing I just wanted to point out here is, if you look on CA here, what we did is, these are the changes from Bill 100. So internet goes uppercase, big deal. The other thing here is, any of the issues associated with any of these other sections are impacted by your bylaw. So, and the biggest thing that everybody's excited about, you don't have to do proxies if you don't want to. If you don't like the idea of proxies, and we've heard some real horror stories about proxies in our presentations around. We were up in Amherst and they said it's terrible what they do with proxies up there, what the candidates do. It's accepted practice, but they hate it, the fact that they bring the people in by the busloads, really, in describing how they were doing it. So because you don't need, if you vote from home, or you vote from somewhere else, or it's easy to vote, or somebody can assist you voting from home, why do you need to write a proxy and have somebody assist you with the voting at the polling location, okay? So that was a big issue for a lot of folks. And the last one is, this is the other part that changes, basically, that used to be that if you're gonna vote by an electronic means, you have to provide a non-electronic means. That's all gone now, and it just says you have to find another means. So if you use internet voting, you add telephone voting, and you satisfy that requirement under the law. I'm not gonna talk about vote by mail, because in most cases in Nova Scotia, we're not using that. I'm surprised they don't, but really most of it's decentralized counting of the ballots, so it's not at a central location where everybody mails it in. The only thing I wanted to point out here, you probably can't even read it, but the whole idea here is that we can do math after the fact to see how many carbon emissions were saved, and in a lot of cases, if you haven't got a policy about sustainability and some of the other carbon offsets, in British Columbia, it sells like gold. Like, they get carbon credits for it. They can buy diesel buses based on using an election and having carbon credits for doing it. We already talked a little about the accessibilities and disabilities things and our compliance with it, so I won't go through that. This is the one screen I want to just concentrate on before I just flip to a demo, and we're pretty much on time, I guess. Every one of these people are stakeholders in an election. I haven't talked about it much yet, but by contract with us, you have to include an auditor. You have to identify somebody or some organization that's going to act as an auditor during the event, so that when the election is going on, It's us saying it's working, it's you have a vested interest in saying it's working. There has to be an independent third party that's testing it all the time. So we have a module and a capability to do that, and that's actually what we do.
Have you ever had anyone try to hack your system?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we have, we did elections in 2007 in the United Kingdom, and there was an anti-electronic voting, an organized anti-electronic voting group there. And we counted 29 probes into our system. And it's fairly common. We know how they come in. There's only so many ways you can come in. In our system, basically, there's no back doors. You have to knock on the door, you have to go through a certain protocol, and then you come in, yeah. On the phone part of it, it's, because it's a phone voting, it's, you can't hack a phone, really. I mean, well, you can in UK, I guess you can hack voicemail. But I mean, but the long and short of it is, voting by phone is probably, I'll say, it's safer than voting. If you want to keep your magic, vote secret, then, vote by phone. The ironic thing is that eventually gets delivered, and the voice prompts get delivered.
I would never say you can't hack a phone. And remember the Liberal convention in Halifax some years ago that
Yeah.
was such a debacle because of the phone system, so.
Well, and you know what's interesting about that? I fixed that. I was with MT&T at the time, and I was in charge of an IT and engineering group at the time, and the vice president of MT&T called me and said, Dean, he said, get your ass up to Ottawa. It wasn't our system, it was Ottawa, it was Bell Canada's system. Get your ass up to Ottawa and figure out what went on in this thing, because they put a performance bond in place and said, for a $3 million performance bond, that said, we're gonna run it in a couple weeks' time, and we guaranteed it would work without any problems. So I know all the ugly details under the cover, but you're right, it was international news that it failed. So phone voting, the way they did it, and what I found out and how I fixed it and stuff like that, and that's the genesis of our company, really, that we came from an environment where, and I had nothing to do with it other than the fact that I knew IT at the time, and that was my discipline. So going up there and fixing that and learning it, exactly as you said, things happen all the time. There's never been, to my knowledge, an outage of the 800 network in Canada. On election day 2008, for Halifax's HRM, the 800 network failed over to the backup in the middle of the election. And nobody knew it except our auditor was testing. They had 3 people from Ernst & Young, not our auditor, Halifax auditor, and they were calling it and say, we're getting busy. And I said, that's impossible, you can't get busy. The way our system is configured, when you call the 800 number associated with your election, it hits 3 major nodes in big monstrous network nodes in the United States, one in Las Vegas, one in Atlanta, and one in Orlando. And it's got Canadian Idol, American Idol-like capacity. We never get dialed tone, we never get busy on it. And they were telling us we're getting busy. So I picked up my phone and I dialed the number and I got through. And I said, so it's not. Somebody else in the office right next to me dialed and said, I got busy, Dean. And I said, wait a minute. So I dialed our marketing number for my office and I got busy. So we knew it was the 800 network. So because I used to be an executive with MT&T, I called one of my buddies who's the vice president and I said, what is going on? And he said, why? And I said, well, we're getting busy on our network. And he goes, yeah, well, that's what's supposed to happen when the 800 network fails over to the backup system. So it's the first time ever, and we were telling clients, by the way, you won't get busy. So you're right. Things can happen, but it's stranger things that happen. So they were resolved in a relatively quick period of time because it automatically failed over to the backup. Candidates and electors, we already talked about their system, the voter help, the auditor, and the election officials. So you will have this auditor cast audit votes. We'll create a pool of pins. So if you have 10,000 voters that are eligible to vote for your election, we'll create 20,000 pins, and half of those pins will sit dormant. And when the auditor wants to check to see if everything's fine on the system, they electronically go into the system. A pin is assigned to him as an audit pin, and obviously that pin can be cast in the election for candidates, but the vote count doesn't count. So those are reconciled later, and you'll see in a report that it actually prints a report that says, by the way, these are the audit votes. So if anybody stands up on CBC afterwards and says, oh, I tried to vote for Mike 20 times on the system and I never heard his name and it didn't come up, you will see that not only did another couple thousand people vote for Mike, but there's audit pins that have gone in and the auditor says, I heard his name, I saw his name on the web ballot that I voted it, I don't know what this guy's talking about. And we found out reasons why people have trouble voting, whether or not, and here's the most common one, by the way, If you go in and type in the URL for your vote site, the number of people who will try to put it into a Google search engine instead of putting it into the address bar, the number one call that you'll get to your help desk. I'm typing that stuff in that you guys have on the back of the letter, and it's not showing up the website. And it's because we don't populate it and send it out to Google. We don't Google initiate it. We don't want everybody in the world going, gee, there's an election going on in Digby, let's pipe in Digby and try to vote there. Unless you get this in the mail, you shouldn't be playing with your election. Somebody shouldn't be knocking on the door and trying to vote in your election. So we don't do that. So people can't find it by putting it in a Google search engine. They put it in by actually typing in the URL. It's written right on a piece of paper. So what we tell them is, I don't know if you know it, but if you're looking to put something in, hit Control and L, a little box drops up, and you can type it in there. Control O, and you just type it in there. So things like that, we train your agents on to make sure that they understand everything that's going on.
Hey, just two questions. So on the auditor, so our area would appoint the auditor, or the electoral officer does the auditor?
Yeah, that's right. You decide. We can tell you basically the credentials you need. You don't need an Ernst & Young like Halifax does. If you have a retired CAO, if you have somebody, this is what was done a lot in Ontario. You know, Stormont, Glengarry, and one of the other regions that were doing electronic voting, they traded financial people and they audited theirs. So they audited each other's and they just put the auditor in place that way. So it's somebody in the municipality, who, sometimes in the financial services side of the thing, so whether it was the clerk's office, somebody in the clerk's office, but it wasn't for their own. They didn't do it internally. They wanted somebody who was external to their operation.
So it could be like your auditor that you would have for the normal.
It could be, for sure.
Second question I had, the URL that you described earlier, now, is that unique to the poll, or is that unique to the whole election?
The whole election.
So therefore, you could, if we wanted to, on our hypothetical town website, put a link?
Yeah.
There could be a link button, or a candidate could put a link button?
Well, what we don't suggest you do, because we can't control your website, so to prevent what's called a man-in-the-middle attack, if I could get at your website, you know, let's say Digby's website, if I could get at Digby's website and I wanted to post something on there somehow, and I say, to vote in the election, click here, and what it did is it took it to some foreign site, and then it said, enter your PIN now, and you enter the PIN and say, sorry, your PIN's invalid. Well, you've captured somebody's PIN. Like, it's not difficult to what's called spoof it and put a man-in-the-middle attack. So what we do is, we say to you, you can copy and paste this stuff, but do not, we won't let you hyperlink it from your site. So you can't go click on your site and get to the voting site. You don't want to do that. The only time we did do it, and we regretted it, in the UK, in a place called Rushmore, they had their site set up, and they had a lot of military voters, and they had a lot of military voters in Afghanistan, Sierra Leone, and Iraq. And a big part of their thing was they wanted them to come to their website, click and go through. And what they did is, in England, when you finish the elections, they wanted to turn on video capability at the counting location. So they had a room like this, and they had these cameras set up. They took their website down to be able to put the new boards in their servers to be able to take the streaming video. They were going to install it the day of the election. The IT people didn't know. The election people were using that as the point to get into the system. So all of a sudden, people were calling in going, geez, this, you know, we can't get at the voting site. Oh my God. So we went on our systems. We were sitting in a call center. We went on ours and keyed in the actual one, and it came up. We go, well, it's coming up here. What they couldn't do is get to their Rushmore website, because it was down. The IT people couldn't. And then they went for lunch. So anyhow.
What about the voter help center? Is that manned by the municipality as well?
Yeah, and
So
it's not a big crew in most cases.
How many normally would be, because I'm thinking with the auditors and this crew, this would be more help than it's not normally.
Yeah, well, what normally happens is people who, it's usually the staff of the municipality that get involved in it. So, you know, the clerk's office may have a couple of other new people or other people that are, like for Halifax, they had 12, they could have got by with 8. Like, for most other places, I know that the clerk in Stewiacke did all the work, the clerk in Windsor, she just answered the phone. There's not like thousands and thousands of people calling in. It's kind of, you know, you're doing it over 7 or 8 days, it's kind of like, okay, we had 5 or 6 calls today. It really is, I would say we've perfected it, but we know what all the calls will be about. And once you educate the people on them, and you put that out on the website, then most people read it. They visit the website because they hear it's gonna go on, and you make announcements, or you do it in the media and stuff like that, so.
I would think the first time you use it, there'd be a significant amount of calls.
Yeah, it probably is. I mean, a lot of cases, we've only had them, like in Nova Scotia, we've only had them the first year, so if I'm thinking about Windsor and Berwick and some of those other ones, that was their first time using it. You can talk, you can chat with those folks, and they can tell you, but I would say anything, for every 20,000 voters, you might be an agent. So that's usually what the ratio is, so that's where Halifax kind of used it. All right, so what I'm gonna do is, I'm not gonna go through this part of it, although I have some stuff hyperlinked here just to show you. This is an example, when I was talking about the audit results and stuff. This is what would come out. You have the name of the candidates, the audit votes, and the reconciled votes that would go in like that. So this gets printed off by the auditor and the CEO, the chief electoral officer or the returning officer. And they can't print anything or see anything until the event goes final. So we have a status saying, okay, it's 8 o'clock, and if you had a polling station here and you actually had PCs set up that people were coming in, and we all know that anybody in the gymnasium at 8 o'clock, once they shut the doors, they get the right to vote. So if you're using an all-electronic event and you got it set up that you want people to come in, what we do is we work with you, but your PCs in the voting place are set up with digital certificates, which are unique pieces of technology that allow them to functionally do something different than everybody else. So everybody else in the outside world at 8 o'clock is turned off. They can't vote. But anybody in the polling station that has a right to vote and they happen to be in line, they can come up and vote. So it's another differentiator with our system, and it's used a lot. In Ontario, everybody who went all electronic set up something at City Hall and Town Hall. And people coming in who are uncomfortable about the voting, they said, come on and sit down with me, and they went through it. Another investment they all made investment in touchscreens. For $219, they had a laptop, and they plugged in the touchscreen to the back of the laptop, tucked the laptop away. When I came in with my PIN to vote, and I touched the screen to start, they had the website, and they had a big keypad on it, and you touched in your PIN, then you hit the enter button, and the screen came up with the voting session the same way I showed you. You touch the X next to the name, it puts an X in there, you hit the submit button with your finger, your mouse becomes your finger. It's simple, it's easy, it's a great investment, and I know they did it up in Stewiacke too. And the screen, the monitor becomes a regular PC monitor after that, so for the next couple of years you use it in your office or wherever you want to use it. It's a good kiosk for anything you want to have as your drop-in as well. So the election officials get all that information. This, I'm going to go through the voter help screen because it's one of the things everybody seems to want to understand. You can't see that at all. And yeah, that's an example of the voter screen. I'm going to do the live one and just get you to see that. So I'm going to skip through to that now, see if my web session is still going to allow me to do this now. See if this time do it or not. So what I'm going to do now is this is the training that the agent would get. They would be educated on how this works, and what would happen is they would be somebody who would be supporting a group of voters or anybody who called in. The vote I voted earlier, Frida Hanlon was the name. So I could search by name or I could put in Frida's PIN, but I want to show you what the system would have tracked associated with Frida coming in and voting earlier. A little easier to see, I guess. So once again, this populates the profile of everything that's happened with Frida with this PIN number, anything associated with it. And I apologize how slow this is, but it's certainly at the office it's instantaneous, but it's taken a little while here because of the land speed we got. Okay, so it says, yeah, I found this pin, it belongs to Frida. So what I'm gonna do is click on Frida's name. Now, you could search by street as well, so if you had a bunch of people and and this happened a lot with the Liberal leadership election for British Columbia, where they had 90,000 people voting in one day, and we were running their election. And the number of people who had called in with questions that had very thick East Indian accents, and they found it really difficult, the team, because we partnered with IMP in Windsor for their call center use, because I know the guy who runs it is a buddy of mine, so he gave me a good deal on it. So what we basically did is, but they found it very difficult, but they could discern street names a lot easier. So what they started doing is a lot of the lookups by that. So if you want to look at this is the information. It's got her date of birth, which district she was in. This is the civic address. So if someone calls in and say, I didn't get my PIN, you say, well, we mailed it out to this address. And they go, oh yeah, okay, that's why I didn't get it. That's my old address and I don't have my mail forwarded. Okay. Other information, this PIN information tells me the first time it was accessed. I connected here at 1:24 on the web. So remember, I voted the mayor's race and the councilor's race, and then I switched and I voted the school board race the last time using the channel over there. Says IVR. I should just be doing this here. This says IVR over here, which means the telephone, integrated voice response, and the PIN status is complete. In other words, I've voted. So somebody's calling in, Free's calling in, say, well, I voted my last race for the school board, and I was driving home in the car, and I think I voted it, but I'm not really sure, and then my phone went dead, the battery died on my cell phone. Can you tell me whether my vote's in the ballot box? Okay, so if you look over here, there's a button that says race is voted. So if you select that, what it does is it goes into the profile, and it can't see how Frida voted, obviously, but it can tell me which races that Frida has voted, okay? So now you see the mayoralty race, the councilor race, the selection that I wanted to vote for a particular school board, and a regional school board vote. And you see the last one was voted by IVR or phone voting as well. The amount of information that's available to the agent that's assisting the voters is very important. I'm going to click on something here called voter history as well. And what this does is every time an agent or a voter or an auditor or a returning officer or any other person does anything in the system, it's chronicled and it's tracked and it's logged in a secure logged entry, okay? It's very important that if anybody calls into question any aspect of what happened during the election, that you have forensic capabilities and secure system logs to be able to go in and work with other, maybe they bring in a forensic auditor from a Ernst & Young or something like that, and they want to go through it. So it's important that every time something is done, in this particular case, it shows that the PIN was validated. In other words, it's a valid PIN twice. Once when I came in and voted by the web the first time, and then when I disconnected and came back in and entered the PIN the second time. And then up here, you see all these IDs, and if I click on these, let me click on this, which order is this one? Yeah, this one. Let me try this one here. What comes up, and it tells me the information about it. So you can see that the telephone number, the remote telephone number that was used, okay, and all the other information that was used to actually do that.
So if you've got a telephone that doesn't show a telephone number, does the system overcome that?
The system will function up any information that's packaged in the phone call. Some carriers, especially cell phone carriers, they actually truncate that. They don't allow that to go through. So whatever comes in the packet, in the anti-packet, we pick up. So the answer to the question is, if it's available, it is picked up. But we can't guarantee it will always be there. So
Right.
yeah. So if somebody wanted to play with the system and to try to do all kinds of things, what we can do is we can put traps in there and say, basically, you see information coming in that's been, I think it's *79 or something like that, which is cancel the information or capture the phone number going out. We can capture some of that information. We won't be able to see where it came from, but we can see timestamp and all the other things. So anything associated with it from that point of view, we try to capture it all in the system. But because we can't mandate that the telephone company delivers it on wireless calls, that's one of the areas that we sometimes don't see the information. information out. But the IP information comes through, once again, IP information is, this whole room maybe have 7 or 8 connections, but to the outside world, it may look like a single IP address, it may not be a unique IP address that comes from outside, so it'll look like the same person voting when it's actually 7 different people inside the building. And I was just saying in a session this morning, we saw that with the Kingston Penitentiary in the South Frontenac election we did. We had tons of calls coming from the same IP address, and we just checked it out, and it happened to be the penitentiary there, where all the staff workers and everything, it's a large institution, obviously,
Just
so.
speaking of that, have you ever run into the problem, for instance, on the islands, anybody who uses the wireless service there, to the rest of the world, it all looks like the same IP address.
Right, yeah.
So, and what has happened in the past is that some system says, oh my God, they're spamming, because there's too much traffic for
Right.
one computer.
Yeah.
So I'm just wondering if something like that, if you've ever run into that situation.
We can control that, so we have what's called a tar pit in front of our stuff, so we use Bell Canada's monitoring service, so things like denial of service, a lot of the other web spamming, intrusion detection, denial of service, all the other metrics and all the other tools and the risk mitigation factors that are there for the RCMP, for the government of Nova Scotia, for all the other ones that run through the Bell Alliant Data Center, we're on that same service. So we subscribe to a service that ensures that a lot of those things that would happen, we can work with them during events. And when a big event goes, like when the Liberal Party in BC, we knew there was going to be, at the same time, we knew that there was in Surrey, we knew that it was 5 PCs set up in a mosque that were going to be pounding all day long. They told each of the folks in that region, and by the way, there was 3 times as many people in Surrey voting on the leadership election than any other locale in the province. And they walked in with their PIN, and they either voted or gave it to the person there that voted for the candidate that they were told to vote for. That's politics, that's what they were doing. But in actual fact, each one of those people that showed up with their PIN in hand and they were using it. So we had 5 IP addresses that had 300 and 400 PINs being voted from. So we very quickly realized that when it thresholded at about 100, we said, okay, there's a problem here. Well, it wasn't a problem, they already knew about it, they just didn't bother telling us about it. And they didn't know we were looking for it, because we don't advertise it, but by the same time. So we could turn that off if we wanted to. We could have done that, we could have said this IP address doesn't allow any traffic through. And so we work with Bell Canada on that. It doesn't matter where in the country we do the events. Because some of this stuff is coming internationally, we have to be careful too. So for what it's worth, that's kind of where we get most of our information through the Bell people. But we have forensic tools inside our system now that do track that stuff. So once again, any touch to the system, any voter touches the system, and time of day, session, operating system, how long they were connected. In some cases, if they were doing something repeatedly wrong, we can track that as well. So we can actually see how they were, what is a mistake they were doing, or what they were creating. And we see that in a lot of the error messages that come through. The only place you can get this error message is if you're doing the following thing. So if you say, I'm gonna vote for this person, no, go back. I'm gonna vote for this person, no, go back, go back, go back. If you do it more than 5 times, we say you're having problems or you're just playing with the system. So we boot you out of the system and say, call 1-800, which will be to your location, your 800 help desk. And when the person goes in and looks at it, they'll see that the profile of this voter, it'll say something like, multiple attempts, systems exceeded multiple attempts to vote. And we explain to the agents what that actually constitutes.
So that's already built in, like it's 5 attempts and you're gone, is that?
Yep. It's typically, like if you cycle back, I think there's thresholds set, we can set it by application, but I think the default is 5 times. So, just to finish up, I just wanted to show you 2 things. I just want to quickly flash up the auditor module on this, and some of the things I just clicked on race participation. It defaults to go to event participation, so I just want to click the race one here, because this is what typically that you'll see. A lot of the auditor and the chief electoral officer, the returning officer, this is kind of their version of crack. Once they see this, what happens is it becomes addictive, that they want to know what's going on. Because basically what happens is you can, and this is one great way of getting voter participation, in a lot of the municipalities in Ontario, every day the electoral officials gave to the media outlets information about how the election was going by a participation point of view. And so on a regular basis, it's, the election's on, remember to vote, here's, we're at 8% in the first hour, the first day, this is great, blah, blah, blah. And they would get comments from candidates, and, they really, didn't cost them anything other than a media feed. And the media started getting, like, who's gonna get it first, because they were all putting it up on their websites and everything like that. And some of the larger ones put it on their municipal websites all the time. So what you have here is an example of the number of votes that have come in by web and by phone, and the number of race participants, total number of participants. So this gives you the, the percentage over here, the population, or the participation rate currently is 5.8. This is a breakdown by phone and by web. So this all becomes interesting information. Because this is the auditor screen, you'll notice here as well, see this little exclamation point? There are exceptions associated with this valid count. So if you click on that, what happens is, it's possible that somebody gets more than one pin that's eligible to vote. So in the instance I used earlier, when I voted from the office, and then I went somewhere, and I went to go home, but I left my pin at the office. So I actually used a pin at the office to vote the mayoralty race, but when I got home and I said, oh gee, I left it at work, so I called the helpline and they canceled my other pin and gave me a new one. It would actually be 2 pins assigned to me and 2 pins participating. So this could be legitimate. So what you do is you look at this, they would be able to go in to the voter help module, look up this person, and because I said that they had tracked everything that happened, they would be able to see the series of events that led to this person ending up with 2 pins. So it's a completely legitimate reason why they had a second pin, because they only voted part of the pin first time, lost it or left it at work, and somebody decided it was okay to give them the second pin. So that, every time anything like that happens in the system, the auditor and the election officials get that little asterisk up there that shows them there's something associated with it, and in this case, Coralie Doucette, and they would look that name up in the module. So I want to finish up with this, and then the last thing I would do is show you the candidate module, and it'll give you an opportunity to see what the candidates can see when they use the system.
Now you didn't know any jokes.
I know lots of funny stories. You know what, one of the things you learn when you talk to a lot of election officials, the whole idea that paper elections always go well. We were in the UK, and they had, once again, it was a place called Rushmore. They had, every year, 1/3 of the council turns over. So every year they have elections, and it's 1/3 of the councilors each time. So this guy's full-time job is conducting elections. He goes in for this one of the election years, and they have a room like this that's got the ballot boxes in it, and they're taking the ballot boxes, and they grab one, and it's going, holy shit, there's something in there. 3 of them, 3 ballot boxes full of ballots, never got counted. And they knew from which election because they saw the candidate list when they opened them up like that. The guy who won by 40 votes, and each one of these things, it was over 200 votes. So the big question was, so should we tell anybody?
So did they?
They didn't tell me. The other thing they said, and this is something that's really neat in England too, when you voted and they folded your ballot, they put a wax seal mark on it. So they actually, it dates back to whenever it was that to prove that nobody had the ballot. So anyhow, they actually have this the candle thing that emits wax and everything like this. So the candle is sitting like here and the ballot box is here. So the candle falls and gets into the ballot box and it starts smoking. They have orange juice, so they take the orange juice and they pour it in the shake the ballot box. So the problem was that the markings on some of the ballots they couldn't see after that. So okay, so this is what every candidate will get. The candidates get typically one ID, or 2 IDs I should say, And because it's, so what you do is you select the event, in this case it's the New Scotland election. And what you do is this is gonna be a display of everybody who's eligible to vote in the election. If you're running for mayor, you get to see all the districts. If you're running for council, you get to see your district. Okay, so, because you don't really care about, if you're running in District 1, you don't care about the other, 5 or 6 districts. What you care about really is information. Can you see that? A little hard to see. Maybe, but just try this here. So, what you see is, over here you see that there's 5,004 eligible voters, that 290 of them have voted. You look up here and you can search. So if for example you're halfway through the election, you say, gee, I'd like to see how many people on Main Street have voted, because I'm going to go campaign. I'm going to go there today, and I'm only going to visit the places that I know people haven't voted yet. Like, why would I go when somebody's already voted? So you can actually use this selection here to see, show me everybody who's voted, and I just want to see those people in the complete list. So once again, this is it's 251 pages. So what you're going to see here is I think 20 people per page when it populates here. And how can you tell they voted? Well, you're going to see a little check mark next to the name of the people that voted. So once again, this depends on which device you use on this, but it's going to come up. It's going to come up a lot quicker than this. You can see how slow this is.
So is this page here something that the candidate could go in anytime during the election and have a look at?
Yep. Because especially when you think about it, advanced polling now, they're allowed to get this information. They can at any point in time. I'll tell you one thing. What typically happens here, if you look down the very bottom, there's this export button. What they mainly do is every couple hours, instead of kind of paging through it and trying to figure out what they're looking at, they export the whole list. So give me my list, and it'll actually say who has or has not voted. It puts it in the spreadsheet format, and then they just sort it by street. They go, okay, well, it appears there's 8 houses on Main Street, and they haven't voted yet, and they've got 2 days left to vote. Do I really want to go and visit them, or do I want to wait till the last day, pull that list off, and then it's down to a third? So it's a great opportunity for you to keep everybody out of your offices, because once they get it, they have no need of the clerk. Believe me, that's the last place to call it. The candidates like it because it gives them the tool and it gives them the opportunity to be able to manage the event. And they can see participation, so they know if things are going well or if there's low participation, The other major thing, and this is what a lot of them do, you see where it says search in? I pull this up and it says my supporters. There's the capability here to actually set up your own version of the list. There may be 2,000 people in my district, but I know there's 600 of my best friends or people whose doors I've knocked on who said, put a sign on my lawn, Dean, I'm going to vote for you. So basically what this does is it gives them an opportunity to go and just grab those people. Those are the only people they want to watch. They don't care about anybody else. Anybody else votes for them, it's a bonus. But these are the people that they already know from their supporters list. And in this case, I'm going to say, give me all the people who have not yet voted from my supporters list.
So how do they get that information?
Well, you see down here all these little things that says tag or add. What you do is they select their list, and then they go tag anybody, touch anybody that they want to move over to their list. It doesn't delete them. It just says, here's my list of 600 friends, and I only want to watch them. I don't care about anybody else. So just by doing, so there's the refresh on the screen. So this is my supporters, and I only picked a couple. You notice each one of these says tagged on it? So these are people who have not yet voted on my list. It's 2 hours before the election goes. They're all my supporters. I reach out my phone and I call and I say, Dean, you said you're going to support me. I noticed you haven't voted yet. Are you going to vote? Oh no, gee, I forgot about that. I don't know where that pin thing is. It came on the mail, but I'll find it and I'll vote for you. And you can sit and watch. And if in 10 minutes later, check mark was in. So it's and the other thing is they use it on their Blackberries, on their iPhones, on their iPads. It's amazing to sit and watch it. The guy who won the by-election in the 2009 by-election in Halifax came into our office afterwards and he said, Dean, the reason I won this election is, he says, I knew every one of the people that said they were going to vote for me voted for me, because I told them I'm watching to see if you vote. They do. They said, well, how do you do that? You could be at the polling station. You could camp out at the polling station with your scrutineers and get the exact same information, but you're going to need an army of 10 people. This way, you're sitting back on it, and it was well known. He would tell them, he says, I just want to remind you that, I've only got 2 hours left to vote, and, they gave us this little system that we can see that the elector list, the same as if we're in front of the paper one. And so it's a whole new shift. It's a dynamic that, and believe me, once the candidates understand it, the way they campaign, everybody's equal, which streets you're gonna go to, how much time you got left, it changes the dynamics of voting to make them more responsible.
Where is this information actually stored? Is it on the candidate's computer, or is it on?
Unless they do an export and a download, but if you notice over here, it says important information, it's subject to the applicable privacy and election legislation with respect to its use. You have to delete it, you have to get rid of it afterwards. It's the same as the elector list or a CD that's provided to the candidates. They sign a form that says they have to return it, or this is how they're going to use it in support of the election. So this data gets grabbed from the database in the data center.
But any tags that a candidate puts on goes to the,
Just to his profile.
but where is that information actually stored? Is it stored where the database is, or does it go onto their computer?
No, it's the database, where the database is, yeah,
Okay, but they can export from this to their own computers and save information?
that's correct.
Okay.
Which is, like I say, in Ontario, once the elector list is created, most of the municipalities in Ontario give them a CD, or they email them the list, because they're entitled to the elector list, the valid list of electors. So they've got different ways of delivering it. They've gone electronic in a lot of the stuff in Ontario, and now they simply say, no, just give them their ID, we train them, we sit in a classroom session. If you want to learn how to use it, a lot of them, to be perfectly honest, send some techie person, and they come in, they sign in, they have to sign the document, the clerk says, here's the document that says what you can do with this, they sign it, and we have that as part of the thing we provide, and then they're the expert for the candidate. I don't know how many candidates actually every day do it. They get somebody that does it and say, by the way, boss, here's the street you should walk today.
So the list of known supporters is supposed to be destroyed at the end of this as well?
In our case, it's on the database. If you
Right.
print it off and say, I tell everybody who visits my home that I'm going to support them. I don't like to alienate anybody. I'm sure I'm not the first person to do it, but basically, who I'm going to vote for, they won't know by what's on my lawn. It's my point. So, although one of my best friends, I ran for it. I know people like Mike I've known all my life. So, what you've got here is a situation where that information is covered under the Municipal Elections Act of what they can and cannot do with it, and the fact they have to destroy it afterwards, or return it, one or the other. Sign something that says it's destroyed or return it. So functionally, this is a very straightforward process. You can tag everybody, see this one, tag all results to the default list and stuff like that. So we go over this thing, but it's important to understand that this is a module that the vast majority of the candidates who don't really like electronic voting all of a sudden gain a real affection for the fact that they can all of a sudden manage their campaigns electronically. And like I say, they usually have some young techie person doing it on their behalf. And by the way, we got a lot of neat ideas come back from those people saying, here's a great, the search feature by street. We thought, why would you want to search by street? They said, because that's where he's standing today at the end of that street. He wants to know which 10 doors he should go knock on. Why would I knock on a door where they've already voted? Because now you don't know. If you vote electronically, you don't know if anybody's voted at the household or not. Using this, you can. So that's pretty much everything I had here.
So you can literally be walking down the street with your iPad, punching in the address,
Have
move
they
along.
voted? Exactly, yeah.
Ever come across the tie before?
Have we ever had a tie? We had a tie in the union election, we did. And, the issue isn't recount. They don't call you and say, we want to do a recount. Ironically, what they did is they said, can you reprint the results? And we said, are you serious? And they said, yeah, that's what they've asked for. They want to reprint them. And I said, I can guarantee they're going to be the same. And they said, okay, just put a new date stamp on the bottom. So when it prints out a report, it does put a new date stamp. So we went click, and we said, by the way, you can do this at your end. So they did. And they said, okay, what's your number? And I said, I was like, 115 to 115 for them. And they said, yep, same as our end. Yep, it's a tie. They had to flip a coin. It was a union election for president of a Teamsters union. But,
Have you got any information or data or whatever on situations where people had the option of either a paper vote or electronic vote, and particularly with the older demographic, what they chose to do.
Well, the best thing we have is the Halifax 2008, 2009, because within a year, the same thing was offered for the same group of people, District 6 by-election in 2000. So it was general election 2008, 2009 was the by-election to Andrew Younger, who won a seat in the House.
Yes.
So we ran it almost exactly to the day, a year later, and it was, the second time around, 74% of the people voted electronically. First time around, percentage-wise, it was something like 24. The second time around, they did it not just 3 days, 2 weeks in advance, but they did it the week of the election period, the advance poll, and on election day. And everybody just said, why would I even, they only had one polling station instead of 6. So people looked at it and said, well, why wouldn't I just pick up my phone? And it's one candidate, it was all 30 seconds. So,
Do you know what percentage of those voters were, say, 60 and older?
yep. So there's participation rates in the two of them. So they were basically, they had a few more voters in the case. So you look at them, there's the difference, the age, and there's the difference in the percentage of participation. So as it went along, older voters here, the second time around, a year later, more people vote, not statistically a monstrous amount, but the fact of the matter is hardly anybody votes in a by-election. That's the big thing here. And in actual fact here, you had 35% out. The previous by-election was 11%. The previous HRM by-election was 11%. This one was 35%. And there was fewer people voting in this range here, which is kind of like, it's almost statistically insignificant, but it's 1 or 2 percentage points. So if you say it's the same. The big difference in the 18 to 19-year-olds, that's 15% more is a big deal. And in the older ones, where the convenience issue, and they didn't advertise it a whole lot, but these numbers, when they went up later, the clerk talked about them a lot, and council really looked at them and said, this is neat. And this is one of the main reasons why they went with electronic voting over an 8-day period now. 3 days didn't cut it. They knew that they could triple the cost, they could cut the polling stations by half, and they would save $800,000.
So, just so I'm sure I'm understanding this correctly, that the number of, say, let's go 70s, 80s, and 90s, well, 90s there may not have been that many voters, so that number is insignificant.
Yeah.
But it actually went up when they were given only electronic voting as an option?
No, this is in 2009, there was one polling station. If you came in, you could vote by paper, or you could go over there and vote electronically. So at the polling station, they offered both, and they offered up to and including election day, whereas before, it was 2 weeks before, but only for 3 days. So Friday, Saturdays, or Saturday, Sunday, and Monday, 2 weeks before in 2008, which is silly. And we said to them, people aren't even into it. You haven't even had the mayoralty debates on TV yet. Why would people want to vote? Well, in actual fact, 30% of all the people that participated in the election ended up voting 2 weeks before. They had already made up their mind of what they were going to do. So maybe some of the other stuff didn't impact.
So I'm still not clear. Can you tell me what percentage of the voters who were 60 and over used paper ballots as opposed to electronic voting?
Yeah, let me see if I can I'll relaunch this because Okay, so if you look back in the 2006 election, this column here is manual voting. So in this case, there was 4,400 people eligible to vote, 1,100 of them, and plus, 12, whatever the math adds up for those two. So statistically, most of them voted by paper because they had 3 days to vote electronically. We know about 30% of all the people ended up voting. Statistically, this is about the same amount. So when you look at it. So, move 1 year ahead, when you offer paper voting still, the number of people that voted manually, there was 4,397 that voted. Statistically, the increase in the number of people here, it went from a low of 28% on average, and on this case, well, actually, the numbers are actually on the last page, let me see. So in 2008, 30% voted there, in 2009, almost 75%, or a little over 74%.
And sorry, but you said paper was available at both those?
That's correct.
Thank you.
Yeah. So if you look down here on the manual voting here, if you look down the bottom, 1,133 people voted by paper in the by-election, which, and it still was, you know, actually it's kind of interesting because the total number of people voting was pretty close, within 100 or so, which is amazing, because nobody votes in a by-election. So you offer it up as an option, and they will come. Now, I know in Berwick and Windsor, first time, it was kind of 50-50, the first time they did. So it was a little better in the remote communities than it was in HRM. But what they did, they offered it up to and including election day. So if you were in Berwick, Windsor, or Stewiacke, you could vote on election day electronically.
Just a quick question, with the age, and to find out the stats of the age, we have to put in that extra in thing?
No, that's already on the Elections Nova Scotia database, so when I put up the voter help screen, I pointed out to the thing that actually had a date of birth, so when the elections officials get their list from Elections Nova Scotia, that has it on it, it's already on there on every record, but they're not allowed to print it out and have it at the polling stations. Currently, the law says you can't do that. They're talking about giving that information to candidates, actually, is one of the things that's in the legislature now. But our system, if you, after the event, we demographically go in and we show you the entire election breakdown. So this is for the Ontario elections for 2000, and this is what your mail-up looks like, by the way. We do like that. Has your return address in the top part of it, and it goes in an envelope like that. But this is in a bunch of the municipalities that we did. This one is, so this is for Laurentian Valley. So Laurentian Valley in Ontario. So what we do after the fact, we have, it's hard to see, but we have all the age demographics broken down of who participated and how they participated, where they called from. In this case, they had 25 votes from 4 U.S. states: California, Florida, Illinois, and WI. Where's WI? Wisconsin. Wisconsin, is it? From Wisconsin. They had Canadian provinces. They had votes from other. They have from BC, Manitoba, Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, and Quebec. That's for Laurentian Valley. So if you look at, and they had 67% of the people voted by internet and 33 voted by phone from a percentage point of view. So what we would do is normally take that and we break that down for every municipality, and that information is, and it usually goes to council. It ends up getting in front of council and it goes to the media, whatever they want to do with it, but it's election information that we provide. And we can usually give it to them usually within 2 weeks of the election being over, because we call through all the call sessions that we have, and we have to capture it by ID. So there's a lot of busy work that we do behind the scenes. So, and what happens is, you have that information, and next election, you say, okay, compare the two of them. Now, once again, Halifax, it was the perfect scenario where they could do it a year later and actually see what impact it had. So that drove them towards doing what they're doing in this election this time. So once again, the pricing, it's $1.75. It's it's in one of the pages. It's up on this. It's in the screenshots, but it's on your actual documents as well. Your handouts.
Can you get this presentation online or no?
No, I can send you the electronic version of it if you want. So what I'll do is I'll give everybody my card, and if you just want to send me any requests or any questions you might have, I can take that. I'll let you write it down. It's dean.smith @intellivote.com. One L in Intellivote. I got my.
Can you say that again?
Sorry, it's dean.smith,
DEAN?
DEAN.smith, SMITH, @intellivote, and Intellivote is spelled INTELIVOTE.com. That'll be okay.
Thank you.
Okay, so if you have any other questions and you wanna email me them, or I'll shoot it, then, feel free to do that, we should be.
You probably got one, but
Thanks, Steve.
yeah.